Okay, we're going to literally kick off now. Have you got the video? Is it working?
This.
Okay, welcome to our board meeting in public. I'm Nicholas Small, but I think we don't have anybody from outside our organisation here at the moment, so I hope everybody knows who I am by now. Okay. So just a reminder, this is a board meeting in public. It's not a public board meeting. We are video recording it, and that is our new policy, and the video is posted on our website. I don't know how long afterwards, but as soon as practicable. Okay, interests to declare, Laura?
There are no interests relevant to this agenda.
Lovely, okay. Apologies for absence.
Apologies from Stuart Bloom and Richard Pyle.
Thank you. Okay, let's go straight on to minutes of the previous meeting, which is page 6 in your board pack. So, starting from page 6 and 7 for accuracy, please. 8 and 9 for accuracy. 10 and 11. There were also some questions to the board meeting that are noted from the previous meeting. Okay, so nothing on accuracy. Can I? Are people happy to approve those? Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, matters arising and action log. So there's 2 open, 2 completed. So just on the open ones. The priorities for joint working with HCC Public Health, and that's now been deferred to the September meeting. And the other one that's open is the revised CCG Constitution, and it's going to our next PPI committee, Alison, on the 17th of July. I know, Rod, where's Rod gone? You've had replies from NHSE, haven't you? Yes. In terms of some minor amendments. No, okay. And then to the executive team meeting on the 22nd, so that's still open. The other 2 are completed. Okay, so unless there's anything on that, questions received prior to the meeting from members of the public?
None.
Thank you very much. Okay, so straight on to the Chief Exec's report. Over to Catherine.
Okay, excuse me. I apologise now, people have been laughing, but I'm actually still losing my voice, so I'll try and make my way through this report. As you can see again, I'm assuming everybody's read it, but with an extensive amount of work, I think it's fair to say within the team. Quite a lot of actually what's in here we're going to discuss today in relation to the local delivery plans, but also urgent care. So I will won't spend any time on that, as you can see, just provide an update of where the team are. But and then similarly, obviously, as we go through the day, we're also going to talk about where we are with the mobilisation with community services. So again, I have to say that those 3 items alone are probably taking a significant amount of time that we're spending, certainly within the commissioning team. Since we last met, we've completed all of the quality accounts. There were some minor amendments that we have undertaken through the Quality Committee and the work that we've been doing jointly with East and North Herts CCG, but all those have been submitted. Excuse me. We continue in the quality agenda to do some deep dive work. As you can see, and I know members of the board are involved in that. With the last meeting we did one on PHP, which I have to say is coming on extremely nicely, and all credit to the team. I think they're being seen as an exemplar regionally and nationally, but also leading the way with our STP. So by the end of this year, we believe that we'll have made some significant step changes in that space. So CAMS continues to be one of the areas that I think we are increasingly going to be spending more time on the commissioning of. I think it's fair to say. That's not to say that we don't do that now, but if you think about our ICP plans and our strategic commissioning plans that we're trying to organise in partnership with many of our other commission colleagues, with Herts County Council, Eastern North Herts Trust, but also with the providers. Frailty in the complex patients is one, but CAMS is absolutely the other one. They're both equally important and probably equally challenging in relation to finding a solution that's going to provide a sustainable system for and healthcare provision and social care provision for children who need this support. I think it's fair to say that we know that all providers are struggling in this space. They are struggling with demand. We know that many of our targets, will go into this later, are also struggling with demand in relation to the way that performance is being adhered to with the KPIs. But we've actually started, we've obviously been doing a lot already in relation to the trailblazer applications, and you'll see that in the report. But we've actually started a demand and capacity review across the CAMS space to try and work through how we're going to come up with what I would also describe an interim solution, but a longer term solution to get this right. We should also note that actually it's one of the main key priorities across the east of England, because the east of England are actually, they've seen a 300% rise in referrals for CAMS, which is an outlier compared to the rest of the country. So there is something that's making the east of England more differential to the rest of the country, but we all know that actually there's a rise elsewhere as well. So I think as we go throughout 1920 as a board, we're going to be spending more time on it. There is money set aside to try and address this space, but actually at the moment our main issue is generally around the demand, the level of demand and the workforce in order to be able to respond to it. So, excuse me, I did say I was going to lose my voice. So, public health, I think for the first time we've tried to include a bit of work that Miranda's done, and partly because also we've deferred the report from that we did agree we go to June. I did that, Richard's not here. No. But I did do that with Richard and Jim's approval because there's actually a lot of work going on at the moment in this space. It was felt like we needed just to complete that and bring it back more as a holistic picture for September. So we will be on track to do that. Some of which, by way of updates, is actually in my report here, particularly around district health and wellbeing hubs. Excuse me, but we will bring a more comprehensive full paper, particularly around how we're going to work more closely with public health in September. I do also make reference to sexual health changes in here because I am very aware of the fact that this has been a change. That obviously HCC are commissioners for sexual health, and actually although we did provide considerable feedback to it as did Eastern North, there has definitely been a rationalisation of sites and some changes in the way that patients will access services. Clearly, there is also a new model of care that they're hoping to implement at the same time. And actually, we're trying to do quite a lot of work with them to try and understand what capacity there is in the system, how we can try and get to a position where reprovision is much clearer, and how we can't just rely on the fact that GPs are going to pick up this work. So, excuse me, I must also say that actually it was also mentioned at the Health and Wellbeing Board last week. And I think the concerns that we have here as a board are similar to the concerns that East and North have. Excuse me, I must take a drink, which is just water. Excuse me. Right, the office move. Well, here we are. It's bedding in down nicely. Still can't speak now. I might have to come back to my report in a minute.
Okay. Do you want to take a break at that point, Catherine? Yeah.
Move, you can, yeah. I've got to clear my throat.
I think. Okay, fine. Can I just ask the relevant people to perhaps tick up if there's anything? So. Yep. Fine. David, you just need your microphone on.
Okay. So on 2.14 on the paper, you'll see that there's reference to developments with strategic outline case. As you know, we've had consistent meetings with the public, members of the public, and continue to discuss with them the preferred option that's progressed over the last since the last meeting with West Herts Hospital Trust board to board. We had a meeting here last night with Decorum, full council, and it was an opportunity for them to scrutinise the plans. And as probably the outlier of that option that was preferred, as you can imagine, was quite a challenging meeting for us to feed back to, and we made sure that we ensured we held the position, informed them of the information that we're going to be taking to board, and can clarify any questions that they had. So we are now planning to have our decision making on the preferred option on the 11th of July. That will be our board meeting that happens after the morning's meeting at West Herts Hospital Trust Board. They will make their decision. So our decision at that point will be to scrutinise the decision that they have made and decide whether we feel that that's the most appropriate direction of travel to take for the CCG. We continue to work closely with adult community services transition, the mobilisation from HCT to CLCH. Still some challenges around some of the areas of information that need to transition from one provider to the other, but we sought clarity from NHS England around the estates, and we have had a positive feedback from them, which means that we will now be able to transition directly from HCT to CLCH as a provider, which is a significant risk, we think, off our backs in relation to the mobilisation, and that has been mandated now by NHS England. So.
Can I just say, so to save Catherine's voice, I mean, a considerable amount of effort from Catherine and from you, David, and the rest of the team in actually securing that involved an enormous amount of work. And I think we should really be congratulated, everybody. I'm talking about the estates, Catherine, in broad outline, to have actually got to that point, because I think it was of vital importance to patient care and patient pathways.
So, you'll carry on.
Can I ask whether the discussion we had with Alberto had any bearing on the progress?
No, we decided not to get him involved in the end. I don't know what actions he did take, to be fair, but we didn't follow that through. We decided we need to do it with the regulators.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know where you're up to.
Right. Well, we've just done 2.14, but I'm at 2.15. So I just wondered, Lynn, if there's anything, just to save Catherine's voice, is there anything else you wanted to highlight from the Chief Exec's report in particular?
Shall I carry on?
Yeah.
So don't worry, I'm going to cop my way through the day. Everybody knows that. So just forewarning you now. But so apologise, but I've got lots of GPs in the room, so I'll be fine. So yeah. Anyway, so we're going to start the practice visit programme, which you can see in there, which we've actually worked through the primary care working group and also the LMC. And I know a few practices have agreed to begin the pigs for us, so we're kicking off for that work now, aren't we, Lynn? So, and a key aim we've got to try and achieve by at the end of 1920 to make sure we've started to address that delegated responsibility. I won't go into the SOC, which is in here. I don't know if David's done that.
Just done that.
Yeah, and then the community services. But obviously everybody's very familiar with that. But again, similarly, that's an intense amount of work that I have to say the team. They deserve a bit of time off. Holidays coming up shortly because they're swamped out with these things.
I've just thanked everybody,
Have you?
Catherine,
Good.
and you, because they're a huge amount of effort.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And my laptop's just died. Right, so I'm having a good day today, aren't I? So the and then we've got the outpatient redesign. May I just borrow your?
Yep.
Yeah. So outpatient redesign stuff still continues. We'll talk about it today in the performance agenda, but there are still some bedding in issues that we need to address, and actually we've got MSK also on the agenda today. I think overall, all the localities have definitely started to feed back to us a number of issues and specifics as these start to bed down. But I think overall, our MSK one continues to be the one where we have the most issues still to bed down. In fact, we were talking about it again yesterday because and the quality team similarly a constant challenge in what we do, in trying to make sure that this fundamental change of pathway is understood by patients, but also is understood by clinicians and consultants alike. There are still issues to address, we understand that, and there are still some pathway idiosyncrasies I think that we still need to iron out. But I think overall we should note, and Asif knows, getting to grips with this now in his new role, is that the majority of patients are really happy with the service that they get. But one of the issues is that the demand has significantly risen, and actually that has caused an issue in relation to the way that the front of house, if you want to call it that, is serving those patients. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the wider scheme of actually what we're trying to achieve here. So there's a lot more work to do, I think it's fair to say. And we're not suggesting that actually we're not going in the right direction, because I think we are, big improvements have been made. But I think there is still lots of work to do in this space. All the other ones broadly that are in here, obviously there's been a lot that's gone live, certainly in the last 3 or 4 months. And I notice when I go around all the localities that everybody's having those sessions, those discussions, and the feedback seems to be generally broadly okay. There are little bits to sort out clearly, but and it's specific. Each individual provider comes along with a slightly different approach. I suppose my one slight worry is that actually we've almost made access so easy as well. We just need to make sure that we manage variation in practice around GPs referring now into the community services. So the GPs around there will be delighted to know that we're going to focus on that in the ERM meetings. Because actually we'll just need to make sure that actually we are maximising the pound that we spend in community services. So I know you're all laughing, but actually importantly it is important and that we learn and educate our GPs on the use of community services. So local delivery partnership plans, I know the board, we're going to talk about it later anyway, but actually I just want to make reference to the fact that we have across our West of Herts ICP, and I don't know if that's going to be the ultimate name. We do need to think about it actually.
We don't know. Yeah.
No, but I keep using that for now. So the plan that we discussed when we had the board-to-board with Watford, the exec team has spent a bit of time on it actually. I think it was earlier this week, last week, and I know Watford are doing the same. A number of us are preparing some of the work that sits along with those work streams. So David's doing a lot around the clinical pathway design stuff, so clearly urgent care is on there, CAMS is on there, we've touched on today, so it's all starting to knit together and fit nicer together. Caroline started to do some work on some of the finances. I think it's fair to say that's got a long way to go, but we have started. Hein has started to do some work on the OD and an OD programme across the system, and Rod is about to start some work on the governance. So broadly, we're not sitting and waiting for that. So actually, what we're also starting to look at now, how is to provide the narrative and the whole of the of how it all sits together. So it's all right having a plan, but we need to, I think, over the next couple of months, particularly us as with Watford, provide a direction and a vision of direction of travel of how we expect this to shape over the next 2 or 3 years. So. And the local delivery partnership plans, which are in my report and on the agenda today, are an instrumental part of that. So I think we're hoping by the time we get to the end of the summer that we'll have a good strategic narrative, a good delivery narrative that sits with it, and good delivery plans that sit beneath that start to make it feel a bit more, bring it more to life. So you'll see much more time on that as we go through the next few months. And similarly, the SPG, the Strategic Partnership Group, we often probably don't talk about that as much, but we have these are quarterly meetings that we have, actually no, 6 weekly meetings that we have with Hertfordshire County Council, which is where we manage the BCF. We've also, they've always been adult focused until recently, but we're now going to, in line with our ICP development, make them also children's focused. So particularly around the link to the CAMS plan. And I have written also to the County Council. I know they're not here again today, and I'm actually going to pick that up with Owen because I'm concerned that we've had apologies for a few months. But actually, I would like to know from them now, as we move in towards the ICP thinking and in line with the ICS thinking, where do they see their place? What does that look like? What does integration look like for them, formal and informal? And where are they having that political debate? And so similarly, as we did with Watford, I've shared our plan with them, and I'm waiting for that feedback at the moment. But I'm going to their exec team meeting in a few weeks' time, and that's one of the topics on the agenda. So I think that's a key challenge that we need to think about what that looks like, debate and discuss. So, David, do you just want to talk about yesterday's session? To save my voice, but also because it was yesterday.
You've got some.
I've got some mints. I'm going to have loads of hot sweets. Cough sweets. Yeah, I have got some cough sweets in my bag. Thank you.
Yeah. So
I've got those. Thank you.
Maybe you need
Any other
antibiotics.
gifts? Sorry? I do need antibiotics.
According to our formulary, yes, as long as it's on the formulary list. Yeah. Sorry, Kath.
Maybe GP can help me out with that later.
Okay.
Right, David.
sorry, we
So,
digress.
David, yeah.
So yesterday we hosted the International Summer School for Integration from Oxford. They came down. They were a group of individuals, professionals from around the world. So we had people from Singapore, we had people from Hong Kong, we had people from Canada, we had people from Sweden, Croatia. So a real mix, as well as some local individuals who work in the UK health system. We presented them with our challenges, we talked and shared information, and this is the second one, so we also ran it last year, and it's just a really good way to kind of network and get connected and learn the challenges of elsewhere around the world. And I think it's fair to say there's no kind of some magic bullet anywhere in the world, and everyone's managing increasing demand, increasing growth, reducing infrastructure, and reducing availability of resources. So on that happy note, it was the best stuff that we got out of the day was how do you work in that space and how do you really create positive outcomes in a constrained environment. There are bits and pieces of really good practice and different ways in which they manage services, and a good example is in Canada, where integration around district nursing and home care and domiciliary care is integrated into one service, so you're not actually having to broker between two individuals going through people's front doors and delivering care. So there's just some bits and pieces that I will draft up and summarise for the board and for the rest of the CCG that we can promote. And I think it's just good to actually go out and speak about some of the really good work that we're doing around integration and challenges, because actually sometimes locally over the last few years it's been difficult to get that message out. So to actually promote something positive. So the feedback we received was really, really good, and we'll just share that with you and continue to work in partnership.
Yeah, so great work, David and Tim. I think we should do a lot to publicise the work they've done there. It's fantastic. So, and then lastly, to finish off, as we always do on the people side, since we last met, Hein and his team went to the HPMA, the Healthcare People Management Association Awards, and we were one of, how many organisations, Hein? 140?
418 that could have participated, but estimated about 300.
Yeah. And we were one of four for HPM for the Team of the Year. We didn't win it, but actually to be there is a great achievement, and so all credit to them. I think fantastic news for them. So, and a good celebration for them. We were also, since we last met, had two of our members of staff. We actually put three forward, but we two people were successful on the ADDS scheme. Which Hein also helps manage across the system, and actually is becoming wider, more of an Eastern England system anyway on this. There were 13 candidates selected, and 2 of those candidates were ours, so that's fantastic news. Don't forget we had 3 candidates last year, including Lynn, so proves that it does also work. So anyway, so we're really pleased about that. And then also we were very delighted to have the staff conference 2 weeks ago, I think it was now, where and I know a number of you attended, so thank you for that. And that was another fun but also work-focused day, where we actually spent the business item as we did last year, and actually really had a significant difference, we think, in helping people understand and playing their part, and it was a staff survey. So we talked about that, what else we might do, how we might manage some of the challenges in there that we want to focus on this year. And we had some excellent feedback, and I know that's gone to SIG now. They're starting to work that up, and we'll see more of that come out. And we will bring back to the board the full action plan as we've concluded it, but we wanted to go through with the staff conference, at staff conference first, and gain everybody's views and input to it. I have to say a real thank you to 7 people in the staff involvement, and well, there were a section of the staff involvement group, but now the staff conference group, who organised it single-handedly. We gave them a budget, which was very small, Paul, you'd be pleased to know, and they did a fantastic job. I think it's a really important point in the year where we sit back, we reflect on what we've done, we celebrate success, we do have fun. But at the same time, we also talk about what we need to do and what the vision is for the future and how we re-energise and collect everybody to move forward for the next 12 months. And I blame that on me losing my voice, because that is when I couldn't speak after that point. So anyway, so good thing I might be less noisy today. So thank you.
Oh,
right.
There we are.
In my throat. Sweet.
Yeah, Rami.
Thank you. In looking at the community services and looking at feedback, one thing that might be useful that I'm working with Renton to provide it from the paediatric side is maybe to ask the community services what the top 3 areas they feel that they had referrals that could have been managed differently prior to referral, and we can feed those back either to locality or in a newsletter, not to give us a detailed assessment from each area, because most people won't read them, but maybe the top 3 and what steps. And we're going to do that for paediatrics. I just wonder whether that can be replicated.
Rami, then moving on from that, whether when they've identified that, whether, and I know as part of their sort of the procurement, we did talk about education as being part of that. I know it's perhaps phrased slightly differently, but it would be really good if our community providers could then lay on some education sessions so that we as GPs and as clinicians can actually learn a little bit more about the pathways.
Yeah, good idea, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Trevor,
just
and then
on that-
Paul, and then Daniel.
Just on that point, I think they are very open to invitations on that, and we've had people locally from ENT, ophthalmology. We've got one coming up in dermatology next month, and one from
the provider.
and from MSK in September.
They come to your board, you come to your practice? Or
They come to groups of practices or practices individually, or even the locality.
Okay.
So they are amenable, so I think you just have to invite them.
Yeah.
So just 2 points. One is in relation to the local delivery plans and the governance work that Rod's doing. I'd appreciate being involved in that as it evolves, see how I can help, but also to be able to do my sort of oversight role in governance. So keep me in the loop if you would be so kind. I assume we're going to talk in more detail about adult community health services transfer and estates and stuff later on, or if not, shall I ask my question now? I don't mind either way.
Yes. So if you look at this one, it's only really something to know, but so I think for just for the purposes of where we are in the private sector later, we'll go through lots of detail.
Okay, I'll save it then.
But no, for the purposes of today, though,
Oh.
the public meeting, and the reason why it's my report is. Sorry, we are. We did have a major issue last week, which the board will be aware of, and we were concerned that that was a business critical issue around the delivery of the 1st of October. Other than that, all the other work streams are on track. The Community Oversight Board continues to meet on a monthly basis. Actually, we met again last Friday evening. And we go through the entire risk register, same as what you get here in a later session. But actually the work streams broadly are working well, with the exception of one, which was estates. That got stuck around an issue of the transfer of the estates from HCT to CLCH. And I think while I was out, David will have then confirmed that we've actually resolved that now with the intervention of the regulators. And as of yesterday, we got confirmation that the assets will transfer as we'd originally intended, and that has to happen with immediate effect. So we have some work to do around the legal agreements, which we've always known that goes with that. But in reality, I'm really hoping that has now unlocked the concern that we had.
And my questions are sort of, I understood that from what David has said. My question is more tangential to that, so I'll save it for the more detailed session then this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. So I suppose I just have to talk about the sexual health services and the smoking services, which, although I appreciate certainly with the sexual health services, there's a change in model. What I haven't yet had is assurances that that model will fully meet the needs of the population. in St Albans, we are, as chair of St Albans, we're losing a hub. So I remain concerned, as do colleagues, and I'm sure patients to some extent, that what this might mean for the services in St Albans. There's also capacity issues with the loss of the additional contraceptive clinics that were there as well. Now, that may be answered in part by the new model. I know they talk about digital and online, but at the moment there has been no engagement with our locality and no real assurances that over the new model being able to pick up that sort of slack. So it may be okay, but I haven't had the assurances.
Okay. I think Jill wanted to just come into that before maybe we answer it. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to raise something about that issue because I have a particular concern that the needs of young people are met as a result of the change of this service, because young people may not necessarily want to go to their GPs and they may need access to other forms of contraception. I think they're particularly vulnerable, and we do really need to make sure that their needs become a sort of priority when this is reviewed as to where we go forward.
Yep. So that feedback has been given to Hertfordshire County Council, as you know. We've asked them to map out what the provision looks like. We're expecting, there was something that went out in the GP bulletin, I think 2 weeks ago, Lynn, if I remember correctly, while you're away. But they are working on in essence, what you're talking about, you know, how digital, online help will also, and opportunities for best face-to-face and more virtual support, but also how people will access the provision, you know, in reality, younger and older. But for me also, how we will, how we've got the workforce in place to be able to manage that. So we did also talk to them about whether it was an option of working and offering the service on a more PCN basis, and how they encourage more GPs to, in order to be able to want to do that enhanced service. So I am at this moment in time still waiting for that feedback. I think it's right at the top of the agenda of us and also East and North, to be honest, with Hertfordshire County Council at the moment. As I said, it was discussed at Health and Wellbeing Board. I haven't had any more feedback, and that was last Thursday yet, from Public Health. I don't know if you've had anything more yet, on the back of the meeting last week. But it's definitely on our radar, and we continue to push that forward just to try and get to the bottom of and answer those pertinent questions.
And I think with the move to digital, it may well be possible to cover some of that demand, especially with video consultations, Skype and follow-up. But I unfortunately didn't see that in their initial sort of strategy outline. Well,
no, I beg to differ. It was in there, Daniel. But what wasn't clear is did that meet the needs and the demands of the flow of patients that are currently going through? And that's what I want to try and see, is the triangulation. They made reference to it, but we wasn't clear what that actually meant. Now, we should also remember that I know Kate's sitting next to you, before she reminds me that Herts may have already lost their hub, so which was shut at short notice over Christmas. So, you know, we all understand the importance of making sure when the services, when they're recommissioned, that there is also budget constraints, and there are also other issues that the County Council will need to address. What I would like to get assurance from is that actually the cohort of patients that need these services, that have access to the services in the right place at the right time, and we were able to deliver them. And that's the bit. If we've got that assurance, then I think we can move on, because we understand, like they do, that they've got changes that need to make in relation to their budgets. But we need that assurance first before we can conclude that position.
Okay, trying to almost to close. Brian, then Kate.
Just a quick comment. London changed to this model, I think, last year with closure of 35 hubs. I'll declare an interest here because when I worked until January, I worked for BASH, which is the British Association of Sexual Health and HIV. And they were very concerned about that. So I'm just wondering what the feedback is from both the client experience and the clinician's experience and the provider's experience of that massive closure, massive reconfiguration in London, and see whether any learnings there. It is a different population. It's obviously an urban population, where Hertfordshire's a mix, so there may be some learnings, but I think that's probably something you could ask Jim McManus, and he is now, of course, the ADPH chair or president or vice president, so I'm sure he will be able to comment on what the London learnings were, so to inform our discussions.
As Catherine already said, Borehamwood lost its hub really quickly over Christmas, and it was disappointing that at that time there was no engagement with the local GP population. I think the biggest impact we've seen in Hertsmere is the wait now for people to have coils fitted, because the impact on primary care, that can't be done virtually, and the impact on primary care has been massive, and patients are waiting a long time. There are some practices who only have maybe one person who can do this role, and they're spending all their clinical time now doing the role that previously was done by public health. I think there are some practices who are really struggling.
I think that's capacity issues. Yeah.
I would echo that, and I think what we had was a sort of we've lost a whole cohort of our workforce who were actually not doing some of this for quite some time, and it does feel that we should have actually skilled up a workforce if you were going to change the model.
And I think that I'm pushing Jim to describe how they're going to respond to that, to make sure we've got the plans. So to be fair, they are working that through, and they're proposing to bring that back to us. So
perhaps another example of why you need to have county council on our new working arrangements when we're talking about ICPs and whatever, because that there is a knock-on effect. So if Kate is saying that people are actually spending a whole proportion of their clinical time doing coils, that means they're not able to see patients for other conditions. So that has a knock-on effect on access and other things. So I think all more reason for people to be around the table. And I am disappointed that we do not have any representation from anybody in County Council here today. I think that is a major concern. Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we move on?
No, I'll speak.
Yeah. Final word.
Yeah. The other thing that's really important with this is with our new colleagues who may want to do coils, the training to become a coil fitter is so protracted, so difficult, and so unavailable that it takes for the enthusiastic ones about a year to get there. And that involves travelling out of area.
Yeah, just very quickly, this is a shorter report than we would normally bring because as an exec we were still ongoing with the reviews when the papers were due to go out. So a full report will be coming next month. But there are some proposed changes in scores. I'm not sure to the extent to which board will feel they're able to approve that, because clearly there's not the commentary there that you might need, although clearly many of these have been discussed at individual committees. Mainly score reductions proposed: 1.2 stakeholder engagement, a reduction in both inherent and target scores. 3.2b, this risk was originally phrased around practice support, and I think as a result of discussion at Commissioner Exec, we changed the description of the risk to practice capacity. To deliver transformation with the development of primary care networks, etc. And we are proposing a slight reduction in current risk to 12. 3.4, mobilisation of community services, I think we've already discussed, and we're proposing a reduction in current score there. And the only other thing to say is Paul picked up, thank you, on a bit of a typo, 3.3. The target score actually should be amber, because it's a score of 8 and not red as described in the paper. Thank you.
You're obviously reviewing it.
I just wanted to make a general comment on the board assurance framework, if I may, because it will save me making it on every or most of the papers as we go through, and I know people get fed up when I make the same point multiple times. But on the front sheet of each of the papers that comes to the board, there is a section that asks people to say what impact their proposal is having on the board assurance framework, and the guidance that they're given specifically asks people to talk about in the paper what it's doing to close the gaps on and what it's doing on the risk score. By and large, it's not explicitly addressed in almost any of the papers. So I just think that authors we need to be a bit more robust in thinking about, we haven't done the job when we've just filled in the front sheet on the board assurance framework, but we do need to actually link back the proposals to the board assurance framework risk itself, which I think you just don't see in most of the papers.
Just, I suppose, in view of the previous conversation about the sexual health services and other services that are moving towards, the suggestion is they can be picked up by PCNs and primary care. Are we confident that a reduction in 3.2b is possible? Because that's just one example, and there are plenty of them, where there's a sort of the bottom line is, PCNs could pick this work up, and I'm just getting a bit worried about that. You know?
I think that's. I think Lynn's overall responsible for that. Should we have a discussion about that with Katie?
I'm happy to have a discussion, but we did look at it. We considered PCNs. We considered the additional funding that's coming through the networks and the additional staffing resource as well, plus our LDB plans for more integrated working, so that practices aren't working individually; they are working in a more sustainable, wider model. But happy to have a discussion outside the meeting.
Very quick, sorry, I'm a bit slow this morning. It's just to go back to the points that Paul made. Can we take that as being an action? Because I think it's important, so that when managers are reviewing reports, they can make sure it's done, please. It's part of good governance. Thank you.
The other point is, Trevor, that 3.3 deals with workforce issues, and that is 16. So and don't forget there is an inherent risk of still 20. So overall, and also the 12, if you think about other risks, because it is important to look at the whole thing stuck together, is also IT and this. If you think about the Watford and the SOC and also the constitutional targets, they're 16. So probably a balance, my view, and we also did discuss it at Primary Care Committee. It's probably okay, but we should certainly add it to the risk. We're just.
I was just double checking.
We can take that back to.
I don't feel strongly about it. I was just double checking the thoughts of the room, really.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. David?
Just to pick up the issue around the sexual health services, but more broaden it out a little bit, is that this isn't the first time we've gone around this loop with public health, and even the county council with some of the changes in which their financial situation has kind of meant that they've had to make quite challenging decisions on. But I think it's more about how we engage with them and the forward view of it through the strategic partnership group, because at the moment we seem to get them in tranches rather than get them as a kind of a plan. So it feels like when we were in our turnaround position and we were making challenging decisions, I felt that as a board and as a CCG we were open and transparent. We did Let's Talk and we talked through it. What I'd like to see is what's the county council's position on their plans and the things that are going to affect the partnership. We were held to account quite strongly when we made our decisions, so I think we need to probably do likewise back and make sure that it doesn't impact in a negative way for the delivery of our joint plans.
Sorry, and that's increasingly important given the level of reliance on county council involvement in the STP at quite senior governance levels across the top. So if we are going to have, and the patient and public involvement and accountability there isn't clear yet. So if it's not working now, we need to make absolutely sure that it's going to work properly later on.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 8, which is page 42 in the Big Pack SDP Workforce Strategy Deep Dive. I am definitely taking this as read, but Hein, over to you. Thank you.
Chair, I was actually looking forward to talking you through 25 different slides of workforce strategy. I would like to talk to slide, I think it's slide 54 in the pack, which is just bring the strategy on a page. I think just a bit of context, Baroness Dido Hardy, the chair of NHSI and the Chief People Officer, Parena Esa, published the interim people plan. And following that, Ruth May wrote a letter to chief execs and directors of nursing requesting that we should make sure that the interim people plan and Ruth May's letter is put in front of board so that they have sight of that. The interim people plan then has great ambitions in terms of making the NHS a great place to work, to improve leadership culture, to prioritise nurse recruiting across the system. We know that there's something like 40,000 vacancies for nurses alone across England, and then to develop a 21st century workforce. Now, if we look at what their intentions is, and we look at what we have done as a LWAB in terms of designing a workforce strategy, when talking through all of these slides with Catherine, we thought it might be helpful to just share with you what we have actually done to bring this to bring this alive a bit. So in terms of the various work streams, you know that I lead on the HR integration work stream, and we have approved a SOC last year that set a pathway for the HR community to work better together, to integrate more over the next 3 years, and on the 5th of July, we will formally commence the process whereby East and North Herts will become the system leader in terms of payroll and occupational health services for the system. That will allow us to share best practice, to have efficiency savings, and to, in fact, provide a better, improved occupational health services to our people. We are also looking, in terms of the integration agenda, to move towards a single approach to policy for the system. And you know I've spoken about the various policies that we've had in the CCGs and how we've streamlined that from something like 75 to 25 between our CCGs. Workforce planning is always a bit of a challenge because we always talk about workforce planning, but there's never a clear workforce plan to be found. Our system have done immense amount of work in terms of identifying what is the hard to recruit to areas, what is our vacancies across the system, and we've acquired the services of a company called Attain to help us with a workforce planning tool for our system to try and deliver the workforce strategy. We know in mental health alone that we need to have something like 450 new roles, and alarmingly, whilst everybody talk about learning disability, we know that the places in the University for Learning Disability has dropped by 45%, which is a massive concern. We've created an academy that will help with attraction, recruitment and retention, and through the academy we've developed a strategy to that end. As we know that there's not enough nurses, GPs and clinicians or allied health professionals in the system. Part of the academy has gone out or focus on promoting Hertfordshire and West Essex as the place to be, to make this a great place, a destination employer. We have gone to schools already. There were 2 or 3 events already in terms of going to schools, universities, and targeting mature, qualified clinical staff that want to return back to practice. As I said, 3 events has already taken place and more is planned for the rest of the year. Part of the work that the Academy is also doing, and the chief execs have indicated their support, is to liaise with local authorities so that we can address the issue of housing in our area with the promotion of affordable housing, which we know that is not a healthcare issue alone, but if we start fighting the same cause with our local authority colleagues, we have probably a better chance in addressing that. We have a leadership, as part of the Academy, we've got a focus on leadership development. Catherine spoke about what we've done through ads already. And again, that is promoting the NHS in terms of all its careers. We know that when you ask a child what it is that they want to be, and their mother or father is a nurse or a doctor, they normally say a nurse or a doctor. But there's so much more the NHS can offer in terms of career opportunities than just being a nurse or a doctor. And I'm not saying that that's not the right approach. However, there's a big spectrum of opportunities that we can promote and that we should promote. In terms of workforce redesign, I was really hoping that Stuart will be here because I know he would have drilled me in terms of apprentices. And we have done spectacular work considering that we have a 5 million pot of apprenticeship money just in this system alone. Now, the national regulations doesn't help us in terms of apprentices because at the moment we can't just share apprentices across the patch in terms of the money, but we can gift it. And in that regard, I'm very pleased to say that West Herts Hospital Trust has gifted their surplus apprentice money to Eastern North Herts CCG, who's using that for some of the primary care apprentices that they develop within primary care. And we're working to see how best we can use the apprenticeship levy. The graduate management training program has also been taken off quite well this year. We've had 20 applicants. I think we'll probably get all of them. And something that will be different this year is that the apprentices, the graduate management trainees will be hosted by an organisation, but they will be rotated throughout the system so that they get a broader spectrum of skills. I'm going to finish off with temporary staffing. That is something that I've spoken about quite a lot in the past. This has now become business as usual, so we have a monthly review by all the HRDs in terms of where we are with temporary staffing. We are using better technology. There's an app that has been developed to help nurses and staff that's on the bank to utilise the bank better between the organisations. And as a system, we saved £10 million in 1 year just in terms of the collaboration that we've done. So clearly, in terms of the interim people plan and our own workforce strategy, there's still an immense amount of work that needs to be done. But I thought it would be helpful to just try and give the board some assurance that we have achieved a huge amount of work already. And whilst we might not get all your children to become doctors or nurses, we might get them to do something else in the NHS. And I'll stop there.
I think we saw the faces on quite a few of us. Can you just explain a bit more the transfer of funds from West Herts to North East Herts and what exactly it is purchasing?
So my understanding is that West Herts couldn't spend all their apprentice levy, and they have gifted some of that through Eastern North, through Robin Christie, who's the primary care lead in the LWAB, to use some of that money to develop apprentices in primary care. I don't know all the detail, but I can quite easily find out for you.
I'm just a bit concerned that this is the first time I've personally heard about it. I'm not sure about other GPs on the board. We have quite a lot of requirement for primary care workforce and development. I'm sure a lot of our practices actually do quite a lot of having students and having others in our practices as a sort of bona fide piece of work, not for remuneration, but to try to encourage them to be members of the healthcare professionals. I'm just a little bit concerned that our resources moving north.
You're quite right, and I was unaware Elizabeth might be aware of the apprenticeships. But we were asking yesterday at the STP Oversight Group to Robin, it would be very nice if primary care could have on a couple of pages a regular report of what is available to them. So apprenticeships would be one, because we get things in piecemeal manner, but we sort of want a rolling document or a rolling information on a website, which is a go-to place where all the things available. So at any point, if you want to use something like an apprentice, you can go and find out how you can do it. That's what we were pushing for a bit yesterday, but where we are with apprenticeships, I don't know.
So I think that is a really important point that you're raising, Daniel, because part of what the education and the academy will do is by the autumn they will launch a portal for the system that will be open to primary care as well. So we've opened 25% of our training capacity to the system. So if I have training needs within Herts Valleys and we don't have the programs, the courses to deliver that, then I can actually take up 25% of the training capacity in the provider organisations and in the other CCGs. And primary care will have access to that as well through the portal. But I do think that you are right that we need to think about how we promote what we are doing in terms of the apprentices, so that, as Rami said, it doesn't all go just north. That we make sure that the education and the leadership development opportunities is promoted effectively, and that everybody gets their equal slice of the cake.
Yes, I think I failed horribly on the offspring who wanted to go anywhere near and the NHS. But leaving that aside, I believe you're doing an awful lot of work to try and help the problems of recruitment. But I can't help feeling this whole thing is quite optimistic in terms of the NHS plans. We've heard before about recruiting 5,000 new GPs, and we actually are in a negative balance from that starting point. I'm not sure when this next 5,000 is starting from, but based on the last one, I think I again just don't see how that's going to work. And similarly with some of the nurse numbers in terms of trying to find people to do these courses, as well as availability of courses for people that we do have. So, for instance, in our practice, we've had a paramedic and had a lot of trouble getting him onto a prescribing course, and have eventually done it after a couple of years. So there is something about availability. There is something about the pool of people, and there's something about how realistic these goals are. The only other thing I'd say, just quickly on the apprenticeship thing, I believe I heard something recently that the funding for district nurse training, which is a year, I think, is being removed, and that needs to now become an apprenticeship that is financed by the employer. So that might be somewhere where we might need to use it urgently.
Thank you. I think, again, picking up Rami's points about the apprenticeship, I think definitely our communication and engagement with Robin and East and North Herts in terms of workforce is improving. And I think there is something for us about getting, so we've just recently recruited a primary care workforce and education lead in Herts Valleys and really tighten those things up a bit more. I wasn't aware of it, but I think we need to do a bit more work around that.
I concur, so I wasn't aware of that, so I think I'll take it as an action to go back to the STP workforce group to have that discussion, because that should have been an open debate to see actually if both CCGs could have utilised that money. But I concur, and also I can say that the STP workforce group have hosted 2 weekends for the overseas international recruitment of GPs that's been successful.
So I agree with Daniel that there is something about, having a web page or source where we can go to and, decide what we want to do. But I think we actually need to take a step further, and that step would be incorporating this apprenticeship in our current developing programs. Making it part of,
I think, can I just say, I think there's a danger if you're actually looking at this externally, so anybody that's watching this on video, that we are obsessed with primary care. Yeah. And I think that this is about so much more than that. Having said that, I think the difficulty for primary care is that it is disparate. It does not speak with the large voice of an acute provider or a mental health trust. And I think that therefore the system, I would argue, needs to actually go overboard to actually make sure that that gap is addressed. I think there is, we've got some really good examples in our own system here. Lynn, Elizabeth, Joyce, who I think have done tremendous work. But there is a wider STP group now that meet, and they need to deliver as well, particularly for primary and community care in terms of the transformation. I don't think we have enough of that at the moment, quite frankly. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I was just going to make a wider point. I thought the paper was really useful just to get the summary. I just had 2 points. I think there's something about, as we start to talk about the LDB plans, for example, how even that group starts to think about workforce and how we tie those, I think Trevor said, optimistic plans with actually what's happening with delivery. And my second point is about how we also incorporate something around resilience and well-being, because we do have, especially when we're in primary care, we do have increasingly people wearing multiple hats. So whether or not it's the GP or the nurse or whoever it is, wearing several hats, and there's just something about, as we're developing people, we're doing that well-being part of it as well, and resilience.
And just pick up on the point that, again, for people that might be watching video, what we were picking up there was a particular work stream within the STP, which was the primary care workforce work stream. So I think that's where the conversation led from there. So just for clarification there.
So firstly, I think it would be helpful if Hein could just give us his assessment on, therefore, what all this will actually mean for the board assurance framework risk, which sits at a 16, has sat at a 16 red for the last year. We have a target score of 8 this year, but who knows? I don't know whether that's realistic or not, but if not, then we should perhaps think about whether or not it's the right target. So I think that's the first part of the question. The other thing is more of an observation that we have a number of business cases coming forward this week and the next few weeks, which are heavily dependent on either recruitment or on having the right key resources and skills available. And I think we need to keep in mind that challenge of actually making sure that those key resources and skills are available. And I think Hein's input, as we discuss those, will be really helpful as to helping us assess the credibility of some of the assumptions that are being made about we will solve this by recruiting more GPs, recruiting more consultants, etc. Because whether or not that's really, wishful thinking or not.
So just closing off then, I think Trevor's point and Elizabeth's point is absolutely important to reflect on, that this is a very optimistic strategy. That is the nature of a strategy. We cannot write a strategy and say, well, we've tried this before, it failed, so it's likely that we will fail again. I think that as a health service, we have to be optimistic. The point in terms of the board assurance is that if we work together as a system, and therefore all the organisations have an absolute responsibility to drive this. The chief execs have signed up to this strategy, and I would call on the chief execs to hold each other to account to make sure that each organisation plays along. Then we have a chance to deliver this. I think the focus for us is to make Hertfordshire and West Essex a great place to be, to improve the organisation development model that we apply so that the culture is healthy, supportive and caring, and that the people that we have in the system don't leave. So that might not address all our challenges from a workforce perspective, but we still have very high staff turnover, and we can do something about that. Whether we will ever be able to fill all the vacancies that the NHS has is a challenge, and that's not a challenge just for Hertfordshire and West Essex, that's for us as a country. But I think a positive start is always a good point.
Yeah.
Come back.
So, and just on the risk point, actually, the target risk score is 8, but we haven't determined a timescale, just say that in the report. And actually our inherent, and the year end is still 16. So even though we're optimistic in Hein says, this is not a magic bullet. So I think we're all cognizant of reality in how we're trying to manage this.
Yeah, I've just a very quick thought was whether, we talk about the chief execs holding it to account, but we don't have a chief exec of primary care, of GP practices, or certainly not at the moment. So I suppose I would ask, Primary Care Commissioning Committee, perhaps there is a role here. I'm sure I know you're already doing some of this, but we need to hold this to account somewhere. And does some of that sit within the committee that you chair, Thelma? Yep, Hein?
I think just on that point, Chair, it is something that we do need to think on how we address that, because as a system, it does feel that the primary care voice is not fully representative of the entire system and is slightly skewed.
Okay.
Yeah, this is quite a short and simple paper, but I think the potential political ramifications with a small p, not a large p, are quite serious, so you might want to discuss those. Because I was pointing to the BAF risks. The risks I think that this impacts the most is the risk that we don't have a sustainable West Herts system, and the point is that the money is going out of the West Herts system and it's going out of the STP to assist another STP. The reason I haven't raised the risk around financial balance for the CCG is I think we can afford this year. So if you just keep those two things in mind as we I'll just briefly run through the paper. So we submitted our financial plans. As you know, ours was balanced to a control total of break even. Everybody in the country submitted their plans, and when the East of England added all theirs up, it didn't balance. And it didn't balance largely because of Cambridge and Peterborough, which is an STP in its own right. It's a CCG and an STP as one, who had a significant remaining deficit. As you know, NHSI and NHSE have recently merged, and we have new directors in post, and the new director therefore was seeking a resolution to this and has decided to go wider than just the local STP and has gone to the whole of East of England. And whilst they brought in various measures to help Cambridge and Peterborough reduce their the difference between their control total and what they thought they could achieve, there was still a 20 million gap. So every STP in the East of England was asked to contribute. I say asked. It was a request. Yeah, it was a request. Everyone was asked to provide £5 million per STP. How the STP managed that amongst themselves wasn't clear. In fact, a lot of the arrangements around this are not clear, as we'll perhaps discuss in the paper. The request was made of CCGs, but how CCGs then potentially got that from providers wasn't made clear either. In our STP, we had a brief discussion at the finance directors meeting. No conclusion was drawn, but there was certainly reference to funds that we had moved around the system to balance the risks at the end of last year, so everybody was aware that we had spare funds, and therefore we suggested that we could perhaps put that forward to help the system out this year. Naturally, we don't just give £5 million away, so our requirement is that this comes back to us next year. The East of England have not given us that assurance and won't give us that assurance as far as I'm aware. They say they've always made it clear that there is an intention to pay it back at some point in the future, and that's as far as they'll go. To mitigate that, I mean, we're not going to get away with not giving £5 million. So to mitigate the situation, we have sought assurances from West Essex and East and North CCGs that should the monies not come back to Herts Valleys, they will contribute their capitation share at some point in the future when it's clear that the money won't come back. So we are requesting that we approve that we put the £5 million into the system this year on the caveat that we get it back next year. And also we want it transacting as an allocation adjustment rather than a change to our control total, and there are technical reasons around that, which I can explain if you want to, but they're not very exciting. So I think, we're asking for the support for that. Just to say, it does actually help us out a little bit if we can do this, because we have got non-recurrent funds, and if we get it back next year, then of course they become available next year for us to spend. Otherwise, we'd be fighting to spend it this year, and it's it's difficult to spend non-recurrent funds in that way that quickly. Okay, questions?
I'm just concerned, I just have a sense of déjà vu about lending or giving people money on the hope that we will get it back, or indeed not have to do it again, and getting into problems in that way. How assured are you by the underwriting of the other partners in the STP that we will actually get this money back when we need it, as you say, next year? I know that's. I know. It's.
So I think there's two things. Number one, we have got commitment in writing from West Essex and East and North already to underwrite the support, so that is in place.
So can I just be clear, as in the next financial year?
Full stop. So,
Full stop.
at the end of the day, if it doesn't come back, that we have already got that commitment in place. So
Okay.
we have got that in writing from the two CCGs. Our recommendation is that we do support the ask, but only if it's confirmed that we get it back. So I think we need to frame it in that way.
Yes.
So this isn't a debate about us giving the money and not coming back. We're clear that we would only support that. And the STP will only support that as well. So I think that's where we need to be. So that's our ask.
And can I just confirm we'll get it back next year?
So I think that might be. So at the moment we've asked for it to come back next year. I don't know how those negotiations will go as it sits here at the moment, and we don't have that assurance to give you. We hoped we would for today, but we're in a position, and the STP are supporting that, because this is an STP ask, that we wouldn't. We can't complete that transaction until that's the case. They may want to come back to us and negotiate that further, but at the moment that's our ask. Yeah.
Okay, Thelma?
First of all, I'm assuming that we've got the legal powers to do what they're asking us to do. That would be the starting point, so we don't get into trouble. Yeah, we've checked that. We've got the legal powers. Yeah, and if we've got the powers, it's exercise of discretion, so we have to take into account all relevant factors. Now, set aside, I've just been involved in a £20 million loan between Westminster and another local authority, and it's plus 3% interest. So it seems, in many ways, I've always found NHS very bizarre that you just, give money like that. So the basis on which I would support is subject to and conditional upon. It doesn't matter if it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, but whatever term we agreed, that we actually get it back. And if possible, I'll go for interest as well, but we may not.
I'd prefer not to have ask that question, if I'm honest. But I can express that was a comment that's how that happens within other public bodies. So I think it's a fair point to challenge. But as I said, we would only support it because at the end of the day, this is money that's relevant for patients in the West of Herts. It is non-recurrent money as well, so we have to be. But actually, we would only do it if we had the assurance that it would be coming back.
Okay. Thank you.
So, this is a difficult one, of course, from giving money away. But I've been thinking that perhaps doing it with obviously taking into consideration all the risks and so on, is this going to help us bring the STP a bit together? Is it going to help us? Is it going to put us in a favourable light? Is it going to finally make us, less of the difficult ones and the ones who want to take over and so on? Is that aspect that we perhaps need to take into consideration?
Can I just say, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
And I think I think Thelma and I certainly spent some time with Paul last week, and I think that the narrative about how we got to be in a position where we are able to support the STP in this needs to be more widely acknowledged in the system as a strength that we bring to have caused less pain to other parts of our system. But it feels like as if it's just taken for granted, and that's not. This has been hard earned, and we have to make sure that is acknowledged.
So it's important to cover the risks of not getting the money back, but it's also very important to emphasize our willingness to work within the SDP and to support the SDP. They need to see that, value that, appreciate that.
Okay, just as I quickly raise that.
I'm sorry, that's an important point, but we must remember we are charged with the effective, efficient and economic management of public funds.
Yes.
Taking into account all relevant factors include that point that you're making, but we shouldn't just simply give money away that we've worked very hard to manage simply because we want to be seen in a good light. No, it is
I didn't say that. I think it's time we're going to give money away, cover the risks, but I think we need to force them into recognizing what we're doing.
I think
our gesture.
The recognition is absolutely key, because we have been in similar. It's all very well when we're giving the money to improve the relationship, but things can turn sour quite quickly. If it gets difficult for them to give us the money back, you can see how quite quickly the improvement in relationships that we think we have invested in rapidly turns away. So we need it really clearly acknowledged.
Fine. I want to make sure we get everything.
So my view is I'm sort of relaxed about lending the money, so long as we have agreement in writing that we get it repaid within a finite period, and that finite period could be more than 1 year, but no more than 3 years, I would say, and that we should have that absolutely. The fact is that partly underwritten by the others is good, but that's just underwriting part of it. I'd like to see that confirm that we have confirmation from our external auditors that we are actually acting in a way that won't lead them to have any nasty thoughts about the accounts in terms of value for money or effective use of resources or anything like that. And it may be that the methodology that Caroline is proposing does exactly that, but we need to have the transparent discussion with them on that. And I also agree with Thelma that there should be a request for payment for it, and it's not out. The NHS does do that, because we will see when we get to the SOC that the expectation is that West Herts Hospital Trust will have to pay public dividend capital back for the money that it's borrowing from the centre at 3.5% a year. And I think it'd be entirely reasonable to apply that also to this. That there shouldn't, other people should not expect to get sort of money for free and loan of money for free. Money costs, and they should have to deal with that.
Okay.
I think if we go back a bit into history, we actually were the beneficiaries of a 6 million transfer of funds from East and North Herts to us when we were in dire straits. Yet, no, wasn't it 6?
It was three.
Sorry, 3. Okay, but they requested it very quickly in the subsequent year when we were still, when we were still in dire straits. So I think the request should be not conditional. It should be timed. I think the other bit we have to be mindful of is that part of the fortune that we've got is that not all the 6 million that we were going to give West Herts went to West Herts, and 3.3 million came to us as a dividend on the prescribing. Neither of these can we actually be confident of in the coming year. So we have to be careful that the way things happened in the past is that once they get a thought that there is a pot somewhere to go and dig in, they will come to us, and we will become the ogres of saying no. Going back into history, the 3 million of Herts County Council support that we had to withdraw.
It's non-recurrent expenditure.
So I think there's obviously a strong steer for us to do this from region, and it is non-recurrent money. So I think I'm happy with that element, and therefore the lending, as Paul said. I suppose the issue is we're asking for it back in a year, but there seems to be this slightly hazy bit of it might be a year, it might be longer. And I suppose, are we entirely, if we're asking for it back in a year, how happy are we with it being 2 years or 3 years? Because we're asking it for back in a year for a reason. So the 2 and 3 years, I'm just not really assured of.
Caroline, can you come back on that?
I mean, the reason they're saying it probably won't come back in a year is that Cambridge and Peter won't solve its financial problems in 12 months. So they could promise to give it back, but then they'd just repeat the exercise again next year. So the idea is that all of the SCPs will contribute to ideas and work with Cambridge and Peterborough and the East of England to share good practice. I mean, they're not. They don't apply things quite as stringently as we do. For instance, there are policies they haven't adopted that we have, etc. There is an issue with their allocation formula, so they are trying to discuss that at a national level. So because while the money is being transacted via the East of England, it's actually being lent to Cambridge and Peterborough, in effect. So as soon as they can resolve their financial problem, if they can resolve their financial problem, then we can get it back. But I think in 12 months, that's asking a lot.
Clarify. So if they're applying less stringent things than us on treatments, for instance, effectively we're being asked to use Herts payers' money, Hertfordshire money, to give better health care to Peterborough and Cambridge.
Has been, so it varies. Obviously, each CCG area and STP areas have their own permitting policies in place. We obviously work consistently across Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire in relation to our policies, but as we know, across the two Hertfordshire CCTs, actually some of our, which we consulted upon, were, particularly around BMI smoking, were quite innovative and were different. So clearly there are differences around facility treatment, all those types of things that we considered when we were in financial recovery. So I think that's what Caroline's referring to is that Cambridge Peter have to show an open book approach to the rest of the system in relation to that they have done all of those things to the best of their abilities, and then they follow the same processes as everybody else. It's more about that they will have to produce their recovery plan, but that's done in a way that's open and transparent to all the other STPs, bearing in mind the support that's been requested.
Okay, everybody have to be very brief now. Trevor?
So just from the previous couple of comments, so if Cambridge and Peterborough never actually get back into financial balance, does that mean we don't get it back? And considering the life of CCGs isn't going to be that long, are we actually just giving this money away?
Maintain that we have to have that written confirmation. And that's what we've continued to ask for. The STP are negotiating that for us. So whether it's CCGs or ICSs or whatever it be, the requirement will still be there.
So it is transferable to whatever new system
we'll have to
takes its place.
I'm
slightly worried if it's specifically to CCGs, then if you draw it out long enough, we won't exist. So.
Well, we'll word it in a way that makes it clear that means whatever transferable body is a consequence.
Okay, thank you. Right, quickly, Daniel and Kate.
I suppose it's just to echo some of the points we've worked hard to achieve a surplus. There are, we've already identified in the meeting already some things that perhaps need some investment in the system. We've talked about sexual health and other such things. So I suppose there's a little bit of a sting in the tail feeling that the money's going to be exiting from Herts Valley system. But I do appreciate the sort of need, in the steer we're getting to achieve a financial position across the East of England. So I think that's really my point, that there are perhaps things that we could also invest in locally.
It's really a question for Caroline. Do we know how much money in total is being lent to Cambridge and Peterborough?
Well, the STPs are doing the 20 million. Okay. They haven't got a break-even control total. Right. So they are allowed to deliver a deficit. Well, as in not break even. And I believe they've also had some support from East of England from other pots of money that are available. So I don't actually know what their total gap is.
About 75 million.
Yeah.
The only reason I ask that question is, to me, 75 million suggests they're not going to get there probably in 3 years. I mean, we know where we are and how long it took us to get back to where we were. So I think if we're going to make this decision, it feels to me that we need to make it with the backup of the East and North agreement, East and North West Essex agreement, and know that there's probably a chance from Peterborough that we're not going to receive that money back in the next 3 years.
I mean, you have to bear in mind this is the Cambridge Peterborough STP, not just the CCG. So it's the cumulative deficits of all the trusts and the CCG. Now, they're all residing in the CCG for other reasons at the moment. As a system, will they be able to balance the books? I don't know. That's why they're looking at the allocation formula. I suppose in terms of confidence of getting the money back, and things change every year, and the fact that the East of England doesn't have a break-even control total means that they accept that there are some areas of the system that can't break even in the future. So at least once there's confidence that they understand the reasons for it and it can't be worked on anymore, then they will agree a control. So it's a very complicated, will it come back, will it not come back? will everybody get to balance?
Okay, I am going to need
Political.
to draw it to a close. I think this has been a really necessary discussion. I think we all appreciate, Caroline and Catherine, that there are some of these areas are impossible to be able to answer. I think the board has made it very clear about the components of what we'd like to see in terms of what's written down. But I think with those caveats, do I have approval from our board for Caroline's paper?
Can we just articulate what we've
Yep.
the caveats to be?
Okay, right. So
I mean,
Want me to do that?
yeah, go on. No, we'll have a go. But go on. Happy to be helped.
We're getting assurance from external audit. We are, don't know what else would we we're not doing. There's the two caveats in the paper.
Is the underwriting time limited?
So I actually have the view that we should continue.
Sorry, I think if you consider the reason that the CCGs can't make interest is because it's just the government lending money to the government, and actually as a system, incurring interest just moves a further problem over to Cambridge and Petersham. Have got our biggest debt. So, well, I wouldn't. We don't make interest, and I don't think we're allowed to make it. Well, I don't know about legally, but we don't invest our funds, for instance.
Cool. Sorry. Couldn't we? I mean, although they want it for this financial year, there's no reason why they need it before March 31st this financial year, is there? It's just to balance the books overall. So shouldn't it also be conditional on, say, within the next 3 months, them coming up with a credible recovery plan that actually tells us how they're actually going to repay the £5 million, and then on the basis of a credible plan, we could actually agree to pay it. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking.
That's our role. I think that's the regulator's role around assurance of their recovery plan. We can't wait until the end of the year. The request is now for them to provide some surety in the system in relation to also their national position. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't think we should be assuring the Cambridge and Peter financial plan. That's not our job. That's an NHS England.
But I think
job.
it's reasonable then to ask the regulator to shuffle along and agree the recovery plan a bit bloody quicker, so that we know we're going to get our money back. Because it is our money and it's to look up the health of the people in Hertfordshire.
So I prefer we do that by making it clear that this is a one-year support, and that's how we manage it. Doing it that way.
And I think that's easier to
very quickly
communicate to our GP colleagues as well. If we say it's a one-year thing rather than a longer one that is more at risk.
I'm going to be very
last one.
Very, very quickly.
Catherine, what happens if we say no?
We have said, subject to board approval, we indicate that we would support the request. So at this moment in time, we haven't said no. And actually, I did discuss that with two of the lay members and Nicholas before we gave that commitment. So that was how we worked up some of the conditions. So before we gave an indication that we did have non-recurrent money to made available, but we haven't given them in writing that it's confirmed without their confirmation of the assurance. So at this moment in time, we're not in a position where we've provided you're absolutely going to have it without these assurances being met. And actually, that's the bit we've got to sort out, would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've had a very full discussion. So with the caveats that have been more explicitly stated just now, are we okay? Happy is probably the wrong word, isn't it? But are we? We're seeking your approval. So do I have anybody that feels differently? Okay, so that has been approved. Thank you. Okay, moving on now to hopefully what will be a very brief item, which is the BCF finance schedules, one of those topics that really I find so interesting to read about. But David, yeah.
Caroline will pick up the detail on the numbers, but just to, Ed is unfortunately unable to make it today, but the context of this is that the guidance for the Better Care Fund planning hasn't been released from central government, but we do have a legal obligation to interact and sign off our Section 75. The next board meeting will bring along the planning guidance. It's the usual, what's the word, kind of what's it called, horse before cart or cart before horse, direction of travel, but there is a legal obligation to us, so over to Caroline if she can pick up the numbers.
Thanks. They're fascinating issue. Yes, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Can you please sign off the finance for something you haven't seen the plan for? But let's just say the finances will fit into the plan. Largely, as you know, this is about the pooled fund and the Better Care Fund. So the schedules cover all of those elements, which is why they add to so much money. The Appendix 1 shows how the BCF is formed between us and Hertfordshire County Council, and the bottom box of our contribution of 11,882 is actually the BCF element of the pooled fund. That is, we only put in now that we're not providing the discretionary funding, we only put in what we are required to do nationally, and that comes through the planning guidance, and that's largely the 10,274,000 maintenance of social care. It goes up by an inflation amount every year. We haven't put any more in. What we have allocated this year is Care Act funding, which was probably being funded out of the discretionary funds previously, but now that we've withdrawn that, the council are seeking the Care Act funding, which we think is appropriate, so we've added it in. Mental health, again, that's largely around the mental health contracts, so according to the contracts that we negotiate with HPFT, then the contributions are set there, and then we have the integrated community equipment services budgets. Again, they just go up by tariff inflation. So there's nothing contentious, I don't think, in the amounts that are in the schedules. It's just that you haven't yet seen the plan that it's going to deliver.
So I think we need to make clear that actually the plan is a continues of the existing plan until we give another direction, which we obviously have agreed. It's a multi-year plan, and actually it has been to board in a few years ago. So in reality, until we're given guidance otherwise on how we reframe what we're asked to do, actually this is just more about the finances and confirming the finance schedule, as we have done in relation to our operating plan. So it all fits within that anyway.
So Caroline, would it be fair to say that, broadly, line by line, we now have much greater clarity about where that money is going, compared to a couple of years ago when clearly we did not? I mean, is that, am I being too over simplifying it?
No, I think we do, and in the paper it says that the finance directors get together now quarterly. We used to meet, and we haven't met for some while, but so they're going to reinstate those, and we will go through the performance against what these funds are paying for. So yes, we are a lot clearer on what we're getting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, David?
And just to note that we have the Strategic Partnership Group, which is the County Council and the CCG's senior leadership meeting, and we go through all of the data and the information of what it's spending on the performance of those services in that meeting, and address any issues around contracted needs.
Okay, unless there are any... Oh, yeah, Paul?
I think it is sort of unusual to be asked to approve numbers, particularly for a full year when the quarter of the year is already gone. But this is a formulaic calculation of what we are required to put into the pot, is my understanding of what you said, Caroline, and therefore the fact that we have a duty down the road to sort of provide oversight of where it's going and all that, but that's a management task to go on with that. But in terms of the money that the CCG has to contribute, this is something we could have approved on the 1st of April, because it's a formulaic calculation. Mm-hmm. And probably in future years we probably should do, just so it's actually approved before the year's passed.
It's just more a timing. To be honest, the reason why it's here now, we do it before the end of the first quarter. We actually did do the same thing last year because the guidance was out then as well. Is that because we have to complete the budget set in the year and accounts, so this is the first opportunity to do that in this first quarter.
But I suppose technically then they've been spending money, we've been spending money in the first quarter that hasn't actually been approved by anybody.
No, because there's an implied contract anyway already in place under Section 75. So, but for the appropriate governance, we would bring it here as we've done. So.
Okay. So I think that we are, as I said, it's being asked for approval. Do I have the board's approval? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on now to, I think, certainly a massive tone. Do I need to move out of the way, or we're going to be okay? Are we?
We've got it on.
Yeah. So this is the locality implementation plan, and just so that we're clear about what we're being asked to do, we're being asked to endorse the strategic direction of the locality proposals, including their aims and scope. So that is the recommendation to the board. So David, you're going to start off?
Thank you. So I'll probably take the Hine approach to this. It's a positive strategy that hopefully moves us into the right direction. Although instead of 26 slides, I've probably got about 7 or 8. So we'll try and condense the data that you've had and the information you've been provided, which has been substantial, so that there's a sense of where we've come to and the journey that we've gone on. As Nicholas said, the process here is to agree the strategic direction of travel. These business cases have been system-wide and pulled together lots of information. That is actually commercially confidential as well. So we will be having another conversation in private board this afternoon. We'll look at detail around the finances and agreeing how we might distribute those and allocate to this programme of work. But in essence, Charles, if you can flick on, we're going to go through a series of just quick high-level information and then get into a debate and a conversation. But these are plans that have been rolling, if you can continue, Charles, for the last probably year and a half, and it's been a real move towards the integrated care system, the Integrated Care Alliance. And what we've been developing is an infrastructure that pulls together providers and commissioners and types to blend the conversation and the journey around moving to what is really an integrated care alliance and system. And we'll talk more about the contracting mechanisms and how we might move into delivery later on. So round the table we have an infrastructure, and I'll talk more about that. But our approach has been a collective approach to try and target all of our resources so that we can have the greatest impact. So we've had conversations even around the table today that suggest that certain actions from individual partners around the table can have an opposite effect within a provider or within a service. And the view here is that we sit collaboratively around the table and debate that. And that's from frontline workers all the way through to directors, through to chief executives at our local delivery partnership. We're trying to improve the quality of care and implement place-based services, which are conversations, again, the board has had over the last year. The idea will be that we can meet people's needs. We've joined up health and social care, so we have the county council around the table. And at the moment, I think we've probably gone through a journey of norming and storming, developing an equal partnership, and now we're ready to launch plans that we think are committing everybody across the partnership to delivering something and being accountable for that delivery. So if we can move on, Charles. So as you can see, current partnership around the table, we're engaged with the voluntary and community sector as well. But being a reasonably disparate group, we're doing it through our resilience forum that we work with Tim Ann Filagoff and myself. But it's really hard. We've set a bunch of principles for all of ourselves around that partnership. And establishing the local delivery partnerships at locality level, which colleagues around the table are all part of, has been a significant effort and really hard work in terms of rebalancing the system. So what you have is in your packs is the proposals from each of the locality groups. They're consistent and they link into the work that we have done. So around 50 to 60% of it are plans that are already in place. So they're plans around ERM, there are plans around the ECF. They're work that we're doing, but we're now doing it in a conversation that is collaborative with other colleagues. So where we are seeing conversations around referral management, and we're having pressures in the system, whether that be through CAMS or whether that be through referrals to adult mental health or whether that be pressures in primary care, we can now have a full conversation about how do we support that without having to go through our contractual routes and actually try to come up with a system solution. And these will also include the PCNs, which are obviously new and part of this process. We're working closely with Lynn Dalton and team to make sure that they're linked in with all of that work. Next slide. So this is the current governance arrangements, and it does link in with plans that Catherine's been developing around the ICA and ICP around how we deliver our services and hold each other to account. So I currently co-chair the Herts Delivery Board with Karen Taylor, who's the Director of Integration at HPFT. And those monthly meetings have set this strategy and supported the local delivery partnerships, which are locality-based, to deliver their plans. We then account to all of the chief execs in the west of Hertfordshire for the delivery of those. And what we're asking today is, if the board agree this strategy, this is what we'll lock ourselves into for accountability framework that enables us to then move forward. That doesn't dismiss our own organisational responsibility, so governance still remains. So organisations like HPFT, West Herts and the CCG will still have to keep their organisational boards appraised and will still require sign-off as part of our legal existence. But what it does do is create that other conversation. So what I can assure you is that all of these plans now have been to every partner, and every partner's governance process internally has signed them off and their commitment to delivering this. So whether that be through HPFT, CLCH, West Herts, all of that has been driven through, and even including the council's adult care board. I'm going to hand over quickly to Charles. You're going to talk a little bit about the numbers and the efficacy to the process that we developed.
Thank you, David. So first, just the group that we're addressing here actually only represents about 12% of the population, but they represent then 43% of the spend, and that's primarily on the frail elderly, the complex patients with a range of mental health initiatives, and kind of 2 or more long-term conditions. Just moving your eye to the right-hand side of the slide, you can see there that we've got 104,000 patients who are over 65, and 16,000 of those, and a further 4,000 of those are classed as being moderately frail or severely frail, and that translates into kind of approximately 330 per practice. That gives you an idea. So frailty is a long-term condition, and kind of what are we trying to achieve, and why? So kind of contrasting a now situation which is principally and primarily a treatment-based, hospital-based, albeit with a range of interventions at the crisis point, rapid response being an example, to a programme which is a lot more preventative in its nature. I'm just going to try and bring that to life a little bit by kind of illustrating how this might work. So a fictitious patient, Joan, who's married and is 84 years old, living with her husband, finding it increasingly hard to cope, losing her concentration. Unfortunately, she has a fall, and her husband calls 999, ambulance to hospital, A&E, X-ray. Actually, the X-ray's fine, but finds she's got symptoms of dehydration. Admitted to the medical assessment unit, more tests, admitted into the general hospital. But it's Friday, the physio can't see her till Monday, the social services are called, and they get to see her, to assess her later in the week. So they have a plan, they discharge her to community hospital for some rehabilitation and therapy, and then finally gets back home with a domiciliary package. But that's a cycle that typically repeats itself over a number of times. So what's the difference over on the right-hand side? So now the story starts a little bit earlier. Joan isn't 84, she's now 81 or perhaps 82 or even actually younger. Married, living with a husband, becoming frail, sometimes feels a bit dizzy and kind of loses her concentration a bit. On one of her visits to the GP, she has a Rockwood frailty assessment, and that classifies her as moderate. But she's actually one of 330, as I've just mentioned, patients in that practice who are in a kind of a similar area. So the GPs now have their risk stratification tool that says that of those 330, Joan is one of the patients who is most likely to have a hospital admission in the next 6 months. So therefore, the GP asks the new community vulnerability care coordinator to go and see Joan in her home to carry out a holistic assessment of her conditions. The result of that is that the care coordinator helps her write her own My Plan, sees some opportunities for home aids to be put in place, which are organised, realises that her husband is a carer, and so therefore makes a referral to carers in Herts who provide some assistance to her husband, and also realises that it would be a good idea if Joan was referred to the new adult and frailty multidisciplinary team. So they review her case, and as a result of that, put in place a more comprehensive frailty dementia plan. They organise mobility classes as part of the care plan, polypharmacy review for her, memory clinic, and so she's got a package of care in place. Unfortunately, 2 years later, she does have another fall. GP out of hours attend. They have access to her care record and realise what her wishes were. But as a result of that, contacts the care coordinator, and the package is adjusted and approved for her kind of condition then. Another exacerbation a bit later, and then she gets referred to the new community frailty clinic for a thorough geriatric assessment. That further updates the plan. So you can see the story happening, and the last piece is actually having a frailty unit in West Herts as well, which very much reduces her length of stay when on the sort of next occasion when there's a more serious exacerbation, because they've got the physios, the OT, they've got some services in place, so it's only a 72-hour stay instead of a much shorter stay. So that's that kind of principle of the case for change. We want trying to put that into place.
Thanks, Charles. And it was really just to give a sense of what does exist and what doesn't exist currently. So there's a lot of the stuff that the vulnerability care coordinators are in the plan. There's new link workers, which are additions to the navigators. There's lots of services that currently don't exist that will be put into this plan. So if you turn to this slide, which you can see on the screen now, this pulls everything collectively together across either new services provision and new commitments that we'll make that enable some of that journey to take place, and some of the agreed commitments that were already contractually put into place. And this is how we're going to be managing the programme. The programme will report into the delivery board, and you can see that it's got its foundations around a primary and community network and neighbourhood integration, and we'll be seeking at some point when we talk about the PMO response and project management to this, which will be significant to enable this to be delivered. So this is what we'd like to do as our work plan going forward in the strategic direction. Some of it's already happening, so that's the bit to note. Next slide. So what we've done is looked at some of the outcome measures, and as you can see through there, we've made sure that whatever we move into, whatever space we enter, so at the moment we're looking at signing an MOU with providers so that we can all work collectively together, but at some point we will get into an alliance contracting form. We will begin from the 1st of April, which is our aspiration, to turn this into the first fully fledged alliance in the system that we can actually contractually manage, contractually support and deliver through. So here's some examples. I won't run through them in detail, but you can ask questions on that, Charles.
Next
slide.
Yep.
So risks and issues, we've raised that today around risks, and actually some of this aligns with the conversations that we've had earlier. Recruitment challenges. We think that by having everybody around the table that are able to support that in some way, we have the use of the voluntary sector, we have involvement in other cross opportunities from providers, because if they're all contractually tied in together in an alliance, they've got skin in the game between them all, and all of us are responsible for that cohort of that population. So there are potential opportunities for trading around that. There is a complex programme, so there is a challenge. We're aware of the things that we think we need to put into place. And it is a new world to the world that we currently sit within. Trevor alluded it earlier and said, well, how long will CCGs be around for? Well, actually, let's carve our path and create the journey that we want to go on, is my view on this. The next slide, please. And yes, here's the BAF risks. So Paul will be happy with this. 3.2b, I think it was, or around primary care is noted, and some of the BAFs in terms of how we will respond to that. are noted in terms of the plan. So we want to make sure that we're broadly at various levels aware of the risk management capability we need to put into that. And here is the timeline that we're seeking to move the strategy on. So it is fast, it's quite furious. It does move us quickly from October to begin delivering around the MOU. The fact that we have all the providers and taking it through their board is significant. This really, I think, is a bit of a game changer for the way in which we will operate, but also a bit of a challenge for us to acquiesce some of the role in which we've played in the system or change it in a different way to mould it to get the best benefit from the outcomes of the documents that you have. So what I'm seeking today is support, as Nicola said, for the strategic direction, the work that we need to progress this, and support them from each of the board members. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Thelma had her hand up halfway through, so Thelma to start.
Thank you. I think I've got three questions. One of just arising from the example that Charles has given. I have to start off by saying I don't have a problem with the strategic direction, and I know we've got to be not optimistic. We've got to be ambitious, but we also have to be pragmatic and realistic. I remember when I first joined, we had the your care, your future, and the patient journey, which sound very similar, very nice, an ideal world. I'm not sure I've seen it yet. So how realistic is it? I mean, taking into account that this is just one program that's going to be delivered, starting off presumably by GPs. You say there are about 331 or so. I mean, for this to be really effective and for us to know if it's working, we have to have a way of monitoring to make sure each person that falls within that category in each practice does have this initial assessment and go through all that processes. My question is, how realistic is it, given that this is not the only program and there's so many other things that GPs have to do, which is, from my understanding of it, that's where it seems to start. So if I'm 80, I go to my GP. I mean, I'm already beginning to forget things anyway, and I'm not 80 yet. But everyone is tested, goes through that process, and that's recorded, so that in terms of monitoring its effectiveness, whoever is responsible for monitoring it knows that all of this is happening. That's the issue I have in terms of reality.
So Lynn's got, I think Lynn wants to respond, but just before she does, there's a delineation between the levels of questions here. So this is, in terms of delivery of a plan, this is not just a project, this is a system change. This is thinking completely different at STP level. But within it is the deliverability that we need to monitor and manage. And so that's the question I think that you've asked, is there's two layers there. One is, this is kind of the journey that Your Care or Your Future was taking us on. And, and actually this is now the kind of outcome of that development. I think Lynn's going to talk more about did you ask a question, Lynn, or were you going to respond to that?
No, I think I was just supporting you, David. This is about the development of primary care networks being part of the bigger, more integrated system. And in response to the question about assessing patients, that's done as part of core GMS contract, it's a requirement, but also we developed our enhanced commissioning framework, where frailty plays a large programme in that, but it is certainly the direction of travel of integrated primary care and community care, and this is our first step on that journey. And having had discussions with neighbouring CCGs, we're certainly further ahead on that step. The other thing is, I had a call with Ian Dodge, Director of Strategy at NHS England yesterday afternoon, for all directors of primary care in England, and he's taken a paper to NHS England's board today, which is going to start to put the fundamentals on how they see delivery of integrated community primary care networks as really starting to move forward.
So we actually have two more questions. Yes. The second one is, because for me at the end of the day, I want to see as a patient how it affects individuals on the ground. All the big policies and fine was fine, but in practice, how it affects. My second question is, I think I understood everything that was said until it got to the governance you put you had on it. It's got program boards, and then it's got reference to locality, reference to federation, reference to PCNs. At that point, I got really confused. So maybe it's not for today, but it will be really helpful, because at the board, and also the committee, really what we should be doing is monitoring to see how this integration in terms of the different programs are actually making the difference on the ground. But we need to understand who is responsible. There are all of these groups which I don't...
Can I just quickly come back on that? So I think that is about duplication. So at the moment, what we're describing feels as if it's an add-on, but this will be instead of most of it. So I think that when we talk about, I was going to say this earlier, so apologies for everybody who wants to speak, but we talk about the Herts Valleys Delivery Board, but in essence, this is going to be, for want of a better word, the West of Herts Delivery Board, the West of Herts Delivery Partnership. So I think you have to get out of, and I'm not saying you're thinking this, but you have to get out of thinking of it as a CCG or as a practice or whatever, and think about yourself in terms of that new system. So I think that, I don't know if that answers partly what you're saying, but I think we have to be mindful that we can't have dual structures running. There has to be a movement to the new structures, of which everybody around this room will be playing their part.
But maybe part of what Rod will do with the governance bit that I referred to earlier in the ICP plan is we'll try and start in there that talks about how we get from where we are now to that Nicholas is describing, and maybe we can visualise that transition and what that means, because there will be a bit of, particularly pick it up before Paul says it being make sure we don't drop anything from an assurance and a risk perspective, but actually we probably need to describe that journey, Rod, as well as the end state, so we can do that as part of that,
and a visual plan, because I'm
visual, visually I think would help.
Sorry, my final.
No. Can I just respond as well? But this isn't new. So this has been running informally for about a year, and this is the whole point of today. Is to, for once, get it over the line and say, look, we can actually start bringing this into some sort of formal process that, as Catherine said, that describes it and honours it from the West Hertfordshire perspective. But we've had directors meeting, we've had chief execs meeting, and even locality chairs meeting and owning their local delivery groups to develop what will be the plan and the ask. So just to say that this hasn't just come out now. And we've had meetings, if you can ever remember the evolution here, we went from Pimp My Zimmer, where we had groups of practices coming to talk about those small-scale plans, to now what are substantial business plans to deliver on.
So my final question is, I mean, this is all part of integration, it's very important, and there are all these boards. Where is the patient involvement? Where's the non-exec involvement in all this?
Okay. Really important point. I think maybe we should let Alison actually then...
That's a question I fielded earlier with David. I see references to patient involvement at various points. On the cover sheet it refers to patients being involved at delivery board level and at some of the locality board level. But my first question was going to be, how real is that now? At what point of development are you at with that now? I normally know the names of those people once they're there, and I don't know their names. And I'm just wondering if these are planned positions and what you're doing about working that and how it would then relate back to us. That's my first question, and then I do have another quick one.
Well, I'm going to plead that people have one question and then we go round again. Otherwise, we're going to be here until midnight. Okay.
So,
well, I shared that one with Telma, Nicholas.
That's a negotiation.
Yeah.
Do you want me to respond to that first, or do you want to get the second one?
This is kind of the same, though. There's a lot of dependency in there on the voluntary sector, on carers, on families, in order to deliver. Now, in these difficult times, there's an awful lot of kind of noise in the air about how much under pressure the voluntary sector actually is. I've heard only this week that Redbourne Care Group is under pressure because nobody's volunteering to drive the vans anymore. It's really... how much are you depending upon the voluntary sector holding up and people continuing to do the unpaid work that they do to support delivery of what we're trying to achieve here? So that's the other one.
I'll answer that one first. So that is a challenge. So the journey that we have in the CCG is if you can remember, when we were in turnaround, we made some challenging decisions around funding, and the voluntary sector were part of that process. We've since set up a resilience forum, which I chair and Tim Vidikoff leads on. We are expecting, as you can imagine, suddenly you end up with 16 new PCNs, with 16 new community navigators. Already with the 7 community navigators we've got, you end up with lots of travel agents, but no holidays to send anyone on because everybody's completely bust and at pressure. So the journey that we have to do now is start thinking about how we invest in that process of actually having the capacity there. So the conversations we're doing twofold. One is we're having a conversation with the county council to say, what's your investment plan? And actually, you are probably better placed to commission the voluntary sector capacity. We're probably best placed to do the prescribing because we know that the GPs see the majority of people through their doors and are able to access social prescribing through that route. And there's a join up there with public health and STP. So that's one plan. The other plan is that Catherine and I have discussed about how we might resource and support a new offer for the voluntary sector as part of the CCG, which we're hoping to bring back in the next month or two, which will describe the impact of what we think will be happening through this process. Because we do recognise that, you know, you create lots of social prescribers, well, they've got to prescribe into something, and we've got to create that capacity. So those plans are going to be coming forth as part of the mobilisation of this programme. And what you haven't got here is the mobilisation. So once we've got the strategy agreed, we move into big mobilisation plans. The part around the patient reps is a good question too. So there's already about 60% of the services and pathways already designed, and they're designed through our own local process of engagement and discussion. So they continue. So where pathways are designed, engagement continues as always is. The reason we've not been able to pull them into the board position yet is because we've been having quite commercially confidential conversations between commissioners and providers and quite an open book process to say, actually, what are the things that we can invest and how can we spend? I think once we've got through the strategic direction and signed off the board, we can then bring in others that will be able to then be open about the mobilisation. My key thing around engagement, especially around patients, will be around how do we mobilise. Most of it we've already done, 60 to 70%, because it's already pathways we commissioned, and then the other part.
Okay, I've got a whole list of people, right. So Rami, Paul, Daniel, Elizabeth, Brian, and Juliet. Right, okay, so you're going to have to be punchy, okay.
The one area is when you describe the pathway or the patient experience, a patient that falls sometimes does need to be transferred to hospital for some investigation, some urgent assessments and the rest. That isn't actually exemplified in that pathway to a great enough detail, i.e. how do we get them in, get them assessed and get them discharged in a timely way so that they can be supported at home.
Rami, I condensed 5 pages of case of a case example to try and just illustrate and bring it to life. 330 cases. I'm sure everyone's going to be different in their own different ways, but the falls is a quite major part of the programme, particularly in the care homes. So a big focus on falls training for care homes there to support staff, and the frailty programme includes a whole falls work stream. So in the whole programme, there's quite a big focus on that particular group and how to prevent falls.
Yeah. Okay, we can get too much
But hopefully
specifics.
hopefully that's where the acute frailty unit will sort them out, tie them up with the existing out-of-hospital systems and get them out quicker.
Okay, we're going to get... I'm just going to... This is a strategic discussion, so we need to keep it strategic. Okay, right. No, sorry, I want to get you, Trevor.
I want to join the queue then.
Okay, you're joining the queue. Okay, right. Okay, off we go. Paul.
So, one question and 1 point, I think, in that case.
Yes.
So, firstly, my point is that it's not clear to me from the paper whether or not additional resources are needed from the CCG or not. And therefore, whilst the strategic direction may well be something we approve, which I think is okay, defining the scope of work is actually something you can only agree to when you know what the resources are and that it's actually funded. And the front sheet of the paper says resources not covered in this paper, but in the detail there's resources dotted all the way through it. So I was a bit confused as to whether this was asking for money or not. And if it is, it's kind of not very explicit. The other thing that I wanted to just point, whenever I see the sort of Herts Valley locality partnership stuff, I always get worried that it doesn't include the other major acute trust in West Hertfordshire, and it never talks about Barnet and Chase Farm. I know they're part of the Royal Free, and therefore but how are they engaged? Are they engaged in this? And if so, we need to say that they're engaged, because up there's none of that.
Okay, I'm actually wondering whether instead of answering each time, we go around and get the questions out and then ask David if you can collate them. So Daniel?
It's just quick about the MOU alliance agreements. So I'm clear on the other providers. I'm not sure in primary care who's going to be signing up to these plans. I think there's a risk at the moment in terms of support about the PCNs, whether they all support it. And I think that's because they're new. These clinical directors are very new in post. These plans have been around for a while, and they may not all be cited on them. But I think the main question is, who in primary care is signing up to these plans in the style of the MOUs or alliance agreements? Because I'm not sure I'm clear at the moment.
Okay, let's hold that one. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. Do you want me to respond now or after all the questions? Okay, yeah. So Diane and myself had a meeting, must be 6 weeks ago now, with Barnet, and they weren't cited on these plans at that stage, but certainly we have raised the plans with them now, so they have an idea that there's work going on for these locality delivery plans. The plan is now for Charles and myself to arrange a meeting as well at Barnet to actually present them formally to the Barnet Hospital Trust.
So going forward, hopefully we'll see them captured in this stuff. Great.
Okay, is there anything else, Kate, very quickly? Okay, who's next? Elizabeth, thank you.
I'm not sure if this is the right time either. I was going to make comments rather than ask questions, but you were taking questions.
I think we'll take the questions and come back to the comments. Okay. Right. Juliet?
Oh, no. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up briefly from the question about patient involvement, just to say that actually the LDPs are coming to the PPI committee in a couple of weeks. And actually, I think that there is also, so I think there's a really opportunity there to talk further about what you might do around it, apart from giving them the information. And also, just to say that we do want to also do some comms work around this, and that isn't about making sure that everybody who lives in West Hertfordshire knows all the detail around all the structures, because that isn't of any interest to many people. But actually, we do need to explain what it is that we're doing, the impact that it will have on patients, and promote it generally.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, perhaps a simple but perhaps not simple question. Have you considered patient and, more importantly perhaps as well, alongside carer experience outcome measures as part of the KPIs? Because at the end of the day, you're a major change. How does it feel for me, having gone through that?
Okay, right. Elizabeth, you had some comments I just wanted to make, and then we'll ask David to try and sum up some of those questions.
Thank you. I think picking up maybe Thelma's point, and also if I can piggyback on Juliet's points as well, going to the LDB board last week, one of the things that we definitely identified was around the comms and engagement, and how do we sell this or really reflect this, the work that's been done. I think it's important to highlight, we're using words like strategic, etc., but we were already on this journey, and a lot of the work streams that are building blocks to these plans were already happening. So, for example, frailty being a priority at the SDP, there's been quite a bit of patient engagement of frailty work streams in the My Plan development. These things as individual work streams had a lot of work already, and part of what Charles and the team have had to do is bring these different work streams together into a plan that works and that can be articulated. And I do agree, we probably need to do a bit more work to make sure it's not something new or something separate. It's really about how people are working differently. So on that point, I think the positive we must take away from the plans is the collaborative work and the integration that's beginning to happen. So if we didn't have a plan like this, we could still get the trust to do some work. We could still get primary care to do some work, but probably we wouldn't be able to put them into a room together to have a conversation that we are all jointly responsible for the delivery of this. And even as simple as my consultants will walk out of the hospital trust and come and sit with us or do different things with us in primary care, that's a game changer for us. So I think we must really highlight that. And we do need to do a bit more work to articulate some of those things a bit better. And I think that's just my comment.
That's a really helpful point to bring up. Trevor?
So certainly as a strategy, I think this is a good way forward. We have to think of something to meet the challenges, and I think this is a good way forward. I think you've done well to identify some risks and the mitigations in the paper. again, I will go on about, I think one of the main risks is going to be workforce within the PCNs and recruitment, and whether we can actually, whatever the funding is, Paul says, whether we can actually fulfil this. But let's be optimistic as Hein is in the workforce plan. So I think as long as we note the risks and that the mitigations currently might not be enough, I think it's a good way forward. The only other thing to add is, and I think this sort of covers what Rami was trying to get at, is that however well we look after this population, they just get older and frailer, and acute things are going to happen to them. So I'd just beware the expectation that it's suddenly going to vanish, the acute workload. And we thought that 30 years ago when we controlled people's blood pressures and statins, and now we are where we are because all those people who would have died 20 years earlier are living now. So all I'm saying is that this doesn't necessarily wipe out our acute demand.
Okay, final point from Karina, and then I'll ask David to...
So my point, I just want to express a concern that I've had for some time about the locality delivery plan, and I think Charles probably has heard this from me. For example, we had a long meeting yesterday in the Coram locality about the delivery plan, and yesterday and the previous meetings we have noticed two things. Number one, I hear you, David, what you say about our partners, our local partners, boards being signed up to the plans, but it really does not feel so on the ground. It doesn't feel that on the lower grades from the other localities really understand what this is about, and they signed up and they understand that things need to change and they need to do things differently. And unless it's going to filter down from the boards of this locality down to their membership on the ground, nothing really is going to happen at the the front. And second point is the concerns about our colleague GPs, who, for example, yesterday in the quorum seemed to have a complete lack of realization of why these plans are in place. We spend the time trying to explain why and how, but at the moment it has not sunk in.
Okay, I think really important points. All of these, David, you can just sum up perhaps.
I will.
Some of the points that have been raised.
I'll try and take them in reverse order. So I think, Karina, so I don't disagree. One of the biggest challenges I think we've seen across our whole system is when the gap sometimes between boards, execs and frontline workers. And the challenge that we'll have to do as directors and within the local delivery groups is make sure that message and that culture and the change of strategic direction is embedded straight down. We've got some champions, and there's been some great people who have worked as transformation managers in certain organisations. But actually, what we need is a mobilisation plan to say, go forth and now have the mandate and the ability to have those conversations. Because if that doesn't go through, we're still going to have organisational barriers. So I'm not going to debate, that's not a piece of work that we need to do. I think in terms of Trevor's point, I think at best, this is probably going to abate growth. This is going to abate that pressure. This will contain it, but you're right, it won't stop a need for acute care and acute management. So that to think that that's what will be the outcome is not probably the reality. It's a bit like trying to say we'll build a hospital with less beds. Actually, probably what we're going to do is abate growth of beds if we can create these community services. Paul, you mentioned around the money. That will be discussed at the next in the private board, I think, for the purposes of some of the commercial confidentialities that sit alongside that, and then we can bring back and collectively pull those together. So that's my hope for this afternoon, or the next meeting this afternoon. But also note the conversations that Kate's having with Barnet and other hospital trusts, and I think that's not dissimilar to our ICS conversations in terms of, we spend about 60% of our money in West Herts. There are other providers that need to come around the table. This is probably the initial starts of making sure that the pertinent ones for the beginnings are locked into what will be the ICS development. In terms of Daniel's point around who signs the contracts, I think the expectation will be the PCNs do. That might feel early doors for the development of PCNs, but I think it's essential that we get that locked in. If we look at the link workers and the community navigators, we've already got 15 out of 16 signed up to do it in a collaborative effort, which is really big commitment to show that we can develop that and manage that through this process. So there are processes, I think, that can give comfort to that. But there might be ages and stages in this. We may sign off the plan. Some might want to walk faster than others. And that's capable within this plan. Brian, you mentioned around patient care experience. We probably still need to factor in how we measure some of that into this process, and that might be when we start engaging with the patient reps in more detail and start having that more fully fledged conversation around the processes going forward about how we actually make this manageable. I think I've covered off most of the points that I've heard. So,
I think the only other one I wrote down, which I really didn't get,
did I miss one?
outcome measures. So we'll include patient care outcome measures. Yeah.
So there isn't one actually.
So I'd quite like to just sum up in a couple of words, which is that I think we are asking every professional group, be they clinician, be they in the laboratory sector, to work differently. And at the moment, it feels that when you're in that particular setting, you know, if you're in a GP practice, you're in a community trust, whatever, how can I do this? Because this is additional rather than, you know, I think that's the key problem. So what we have to articulate is, and we have to help everybody, is what bits don't happen by certain people because they're being done by others, you know, voluntary sector, navigators. That people have to have confidence in that in order to make the leap. So I think that's going to be the really important bit going forward. It's not actually only about money, it's about working differently and having the confidence to work differently, particularly, you know, GP practices which in the past, you know, have very little capacity to, you know, because if they suddenly find they've got to queue of patients outside the door and they've decided to all go to multidisciplinary meetings, then actually they've got a problem, haven't they? But I mean, that could be articulated. So I think that's just something we need to sort of really bear in mind.
I think it's important as part of we move, and we've talked about CCGs and evolutions and everything today, is that our role will be, and this is what this paper is about, there's a second paper on the contractual piece, which is the confidential part, as we talked about earlier, in the mummy, is our job to set the strategic and lead the strategic direction, which is what this paper has done.
Yes.
So I think that's the ask for today. So I honestly think it's a really giant leap forward in our ICP development, and we should endorse
And I think the final plea is that once we've got through this hoop, I think we need to really make some sort of, you know, announcement so that the SDP are clear about what we're doing, because that it is important to message this very clearly for the wider system.
Yeah, I wrote down comms.
Okay, so I think we were seeking endorsement. Do I have the board's endorsement? Yep, and a very good discussion.
Sorry, Nicholas, I
Yeah.
don't want to leave it here, but
Go on.
This says direction and scope, and the scope we should agree this afternoon when we agree that the resources are.
Yes.
The scope and resources have to be linked.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
direction's
No, I
not-
think that's a very, very important point. Okay, Paul, that's a point taken. Okay, with Paul's point noted, I'm going to take that as an endorsement. And we're going to have a 5-minute break. Apologies, Paul, because we need to have a bit of a break. And then we're going to, well, what time are we now? Right, 25 past, 8 minutes. Okay. I know.
I do have slides if you want to use.
Ask to speak, because I can't see you easily. Trevor, you have to have a bell or something, because I can't see you. I know. You're ready to hide and go, just arrow.
No, I didn't. No, it's probably pretty cold though.
Just so honestly, well, when Kate and I met with the medical
Thank you for that wonderful intro. I can confidently tell you that the water source is completely unknown to me. However, so this report is our annual update on our actions in terms of sustainable development. Part of what used to be called being a good corporate citizen, but they've now changed the wording to something far more interesting, which is the Sustainable Development Action Plan. We've struggled with this a little as an organisation, largely because we've been growing in numbers over the last few years. So whilst per head of employee, we are reducing waste, we are reducing carbon emissions, etc. In total terms, our actual carbon footprint is increasing. In one sense, I'll just bit of an aside, but it was interesting that somebody commented at the staff conference that we were giving away plastic trophies, and should we give away paper certificates? There's actually no plastic reduction in the requirements, so that's something we perhaps might want to think about ourselves. So we are, I think plastic is probably more topical than carbon reduction has been for some time. So we're measured against a number of areas, and on page, I can't find the page number, 152, you can see how we've measured our compliance against the various areas, the corporate approach, asset management, etc., etc. Quite a few of those are not especially relevant to a CCG. They'll be very relevant to a provider who is heating and maintaining buildings, which is why we have fairly low compliance on some items, because because we say no or non-applicable, it just marks our score down. But we are still improving in terms of our scores as much as we can. An issue we had with the last office we had, HEMA 1, was that most of the services and the utilities were shared between the occupants, and we couldn't accurately measure our usage. We've now moved here, and I can't say that will be any easier. However, we know that this is a far more efficient building for all the reasons listed in the report. So I'm happy to take questions, but moving the offices has done a lot for us, let's put it that way.
So I think it is obvious that as a CCG it's a struggle to find the relevance of some of these targets. I think it'll be much more meaningful at the system level, and I think one of the things the STP actually should be taking on is its role to challenge sustainability across the health system, rather than this being something we just do as a CCG where we may just be moving sustainability issues around. So I think that's something to actually the STP could usefully take the lead on across the health economy, and I would suggest that we should ask them to do so.
Actually, Anne Radmore has agreed that it would be an East of England objective rather than STP1. So, which I think is probably right. So, from an East of England, what are we going to be known for? Whether it's plastic or otherwise, there's obviously a sway, appropriate sway of the public opinion that this is important for us as our corporate responsibilities as one of the largest employers in the East of England. So that's why it was discussed, and I think we all supported it.
And I think there are some real opportunities. I mean, with the SOC coming up, for instance, the new stuff there it's a real opportunity to move sustainability forward in a big way, and we need to make sure that part of our challenge is that they are actually taking that opportunity.
When do we think we're going to be in a position to start realising some of the benefits of the agile working arrangements that we now have?
So, as execs will tell you this week, so I started my new video conference mantra this week, which we're on day 4, deciding that we had to lead from the front. So I think overall we are actually doing a lot in this space because we have reduced our footprint significantly, and as you know, we're maximising every inch of space now that we have available. So what we haven't quite got right then yet, and it's just a mindset issue, is the use of the technology. So, you know, we are all kitted up with the relevant video conference. I was talking to Caroline about, and Trudy also, about how we set a target about reducing our travel time by 50%, for instance, because that will be a good, another hard measure. And we could all use video conference much more so to do that, particularly the management team in the way we spend most of our time driving around the A414 and lots of occasions. So we're on day 4. Day 1 and 2 was a little bit bumpy, but it was a bit bumpy yesterday, but I'll blame that on Caroline. But anyway, we are doing it. So we've asked for 2 champions from each team. They're going to have dedicated training. But I think we as an exec team are going to take a really strong message about leading by example, leading up front on this. And we've started, the aim will be is you offer technology first as your offer of a meeting, rather than just naturally assuming we're all going to have a face-to-face, and we'll travel to each other. So that's
just to hook into that makes it really important that when we talk about multi-specialty team, multidisciplinary team meetings, particularly in terms of our pathways and the direction of travel, that has to be integral in that, because that will be the best way of actually increasing the efficiency within the system.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know there is some work going on about it, but I just wanted to raise it because I think it's so integral to the success of the partnerships and the delivery plans. So I've got off on Harbury Horse now. Okay. Anybody else want to make a comment? Okay.
Can I just make note? This is a small collection of junk mail that Romy and I collected this morning. You've got one as well. These companies, some of this is inviting us to conferences that's happening today. This is a complete waste. And I don't know if there's any way we can register with these companies that it's just not appreciated, nor sensible, nor sustainable.
Right. I think we'll take that one outside and see what we can do. No, I think it's important. We can make a policy statement, couldn't we, and maybe put something on our website about how we like to be communicated with.
Good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that. So I now go on to the item 15, which is the Audit Committee Annual Report. Paul, I'll take that as read, but clearly there might be a few points that you might want to highlight.
Yes, thank you. I welcome the opportunity to speak for once in the meeting as well. I think the paper itself does stand on its own, but I would like to thank Rod and Katie for actually having authored it, which because I think it's a good report on that basis. I think more interest, it might just mention my priorities for this year for the Audit Committee, and what I want to do this year is to try to give risk management a bit more of a focus rather than some of the control stuff, which I think is actually, as you'll see from the report, in reasonably good state. Doesn't mean we won't be looking at internal audit stuff, but actually I think what I want to do is to try to spend more focus on the risk management side. I haven't actually mentioned this to Katie yet, so it'll be a pleasant surprise for her, but my intention is that we'll swap the agendas round in future and have the risk deep dives at the beginning of the meeting so we can do them due justice, and then we'll go through the rest of the stuff afterwards. We've already had discussions about the next upcoming risk deep dive with I was going to say the victim, but that's not the right word, with the presenter, to help shape what it is we're looking for, so we can try and make it a bit of a template for risk deep dives going forward. Because I think there's always this confusion amongst some of the team about, well, what are you asking us for here? Isn't this something we cover in the performance committee or quality committee already? So I think we hopefully we have helped to provide some of the context, and the first risk deep dive that we have coming up at the next meeting should help to set the template for how we do it going forward. So that's all I wanted to say at that stage. Happy to take any questions, of course.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
I think if there are no questions, I think we should just call our thank you for whether diligently handle this. So thank you very much, and obviously to Katie for the paper. Okay, Julia, communications and engagement report.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. Just perhaps draw your attention just to a couple of things. First of all, and perhaps this is relevant in the context of the conversation we had a little earlier with Paul, in terms of the community health ambassadors. So we are, and this is really Heather's work, Heather in my team, who has been working with West Herts College to talk to them about getting some young people to be involved. We know that as has been mentioned just earlier, a lot of the people who do get involved in our work, and I'm not denigrating those people, they put a lot of effort into it, but actually they are of a certain age. And so in terms of diversity, getting some young people involved as health ambassadors, I think, is a really good thing. Also, I know that David, you mentioned the SOC in the context of Catherine's Chief Exec's report, but just to sort of say in terms of participation, and you will see a fairly extensive report at the meeting on the 11th of July. Something we're doing, which you will be aware that we did the joint meeting we had earlier this month, is so for the meeting coming up on the 11th of July, we have actively invited members of the public to send written submissions in. We are limiting that again up to 500 words. We're not going to have lengthy essays, but we do hope that we will get a good number of people, and I'm pretty sure we will actually, sending in those comments to us, and we should have them in time to collate something for the board. We are actually promoting that pretty widely so that, again, we get a reasonable spread of opinion for that sort of final decision making on the 11th of July. Just a couple more things. On social media, we have actually this week achieved the 5,000 followers milestone, which I think is great. And each week a few more people follow us, and we do actually get quite a bit of activity on Twitter. Some of it's quite complex for us, but actually I think the important thing is that people are actually getting to know a little bit more about what we do via that channel. Finally, on staff engagement, and again, I know Catherine talked quite a bit about the staff conference. At SIG this week, lots of enthusiasm for taking forward the ideas that were put forward at the staff conference, and also just to say about the staff involvement group that actually we have some real stalwarts there, which is fantastic. We also have a couple of new people, so it's really great to have some fresh eyes on things as well. So it's a pretty lively and very constructive group. Thank you.
I was interested in, you say some of the followers you get, the issues are quite complex. Can you just give one example, please?
Yeah, so we do get some people making comments on Twitter about some of our difficult decisions in the past, in particular on Nascot Lawn, and that continues to some extent, even though there isn't any public information out there. We have resolved the issues, but that is still a theme. It's pretty narrow in the sense there aren't lots of people communicating with us about that on Twitter, but it is there is a thread there that continues.
I just want to highlight one particular aspect, and again it relates to the discussion we were having earlier about broadening the range of involvement that we get. We have now had our first evening meeting of the PPG network. This was following a suggestion that it might open us up to an audience of working people who couldn't attend the daytime sessions that we normally have. We did that at Cemetery Hill, down the road there, and we had a good turnout with some new faces as well as some older faces, but quite a number of those new faces had travelled some distance to actually be there in the evening. It wasn't massively attended, but enough to make us feel that there is the possibility that people, again though, the demographic tended to be towards the older, and it could be just a feature of the fact that people are more involved with the health system anyway, but it was a good move towards trying to, in our continuing efforts to try and broaden involvement.
I just put a personal thanks, which I think we should record in public, both to Jill and to John, who are both here today, for their work, their tireless work, as volunteers, not paid, in really trying to improve our patient engagement, which I think is absolutely amazing. And we really do need to make sure, which is another theme I've discussed with Alison, which is about how do we make sure that in the successor organisations and in our West of Hertfordshire ICP, that patient engagement and involvement is absolutely at the core of what happens. So I think clearly, Health Watch very clearly a part of that. I know we're having a meeting with Health Watch, I think, next week or tomorrow, I can't remember. So all of these themes need to be a really strong component of us moving forward into the new system.
And we did raise that with Paul.
We did, yes, we did. Sorry, Rami, yeah.
Just as another communication element that we might want to highlight going forward is the prehab work that Richard has got a lot of practices to do. As someone who was quite skeptical about it, it's been a roaring success. We did it a couple of weeks ago. We've actually got a waiting list for the next one because we actually went out to 100 patients. We needed 25. We got 30 into the first cohort. 28 of them turned up. And the feedback has been, basically it's knocked even my more skeptical partners who I forced to provide the presentation. We've got a very good story there to tell.
So just a quick question.
Sorry. One job. Essentially the 10.
Just a quick question on the NHS app. Have we had any feedback from practices or patients on that?
So the stage we're at the moment is that we are checking that all practices have got that working. I think there's been quite a lot of progress on that in the last couple of months or so. We have been doing communications with practices and with PPGs. There is a national campaign that is launching in September, and we will of course get heavily involved in that, in promoting it. What we didn't want to do was to do huge amounts of promotion for NHS England. We're not happy about us doing it until we were absolutely clear that it was working properly. I don't think we've had any particular feedback about problems with it actually. Whether anybody else around the table, I can't see anybody. I think mostly it's been working pretty well actually. I think it's been quite an effective launch.
Other than the health minister, he didn't like it. I haven't heard it. No. Interesting.
The only thing I would say is that this is the performance report that went to the Performance Committee nearly a month ago now, so 3 weeks ago. So we have just sent out the performance report for the Performance Committee next week. So, and given that you are always in backdated data with performance, because we're really keen that you see validated performance data, I thought it was worth me just updating in relation to what the next report says. So obviously what you've got in here is the constitutional standards that the board sees. The Performance Committee sees the full range of providers and has in-depth discussions about any areas of concern across all providers. But in terms of the constitutional standards, so the 4-hour standard, the A&E standard at West Hertfordshire does remain non-compliant for March. It's at 77.1%. There has been a nationally commissioned deep dive analysis into the A&E activity, which we're waiting for the final report on, because it is anecdotal, but probably very real that activity has risen. So we're monitoring that through the System Resilience Group. In terms of delayed transfers of care, we continue to be compliant with that at 3.1% for March, and that's continued through, although we have had some challenging times over the last couple of weeks, seeing quite an increase in the need for neuro beds and non-weight-bearing beds. So we've been looking at alternative commissioning arrangements to try and manage that flow out of West Herts into the HCT beds where there were some real challenges in having availability for those neuro patients. So again, that's work that the system resilience team are doing, and you'll be aware that we've made quite significant changes in the structure of system resilience team within my team, and we've put a lot more clinical staff within that team, which is, I think, what is having such a positive impact on the detox, because we've got clinical oversight of these, which helps when you're trying to have discussions with the providers. In terms of referral to treatment time, we didn't meet the target again in March 2019. We're at 85.5%. Huge amount of work going on with West Herts Trust in terms of capacity plan and outsourcing, and we're seeing regular updates on that on a weekly basis. We have flagged previously to the board, and we've discussed it at Performance Committee around the Royal Free issues in that they are not submitting their RTT performance nationally now because of problems that they've had with their data, but we are monitoring that on a local basis, and we are aware of the challenges that they're having. Cancer. So cancer remains challenging in terms of compliance, and for March and April we're still reporting non-compliance with 4 out of 8 of the national cancer waiting times. We discussed this with West Herts this week, actually, on Tuesday, in terms of their cancer performance, because we have had lots of discussions about this previously with them, and it doesn't seem to change. They have given us assurance that they have a tumour site specific action plan for every area, and they are pulling that into an overarching improvement plan around cancer. That's going through their internal governance processes for approval, and we are planning a deep dive into that with the Quality and Performance Committee. With their internal governance processes, that is going to be the beginning of October. When we see that. That doesn't mean we won't continue to monitor through the usual monitoring processes, but I think that will give us some more assurance around the processes in West Herts. So those are sort of headlines.
Thank you. Comments? Yeah, Trevor. Hey.
Good evening. The 52-week waiters, which was coming down, I just wondered, obviously there was a trajectory for the end of March, whether you can update us on that.
Yep, so the trajectory was met other than 4 patients at the end of March, and those were all patient choice. They were patients that chose to wait for the Easter holidays, which if Easter had been in March, it probably would have not been non-compliant. So, and we've continued to monitor that beyond the end of March, and we are still seeing compliance with that. So the numbers are down in the sort of single figures now.
Can I just sort of, yeah, Rami. Okay.
With the cancer, Diane, what traction do we have on the other trusts? Because East and North are part of the problem, as I understand, so are Barnet. So do we have traction on them, or are we a little bit on the outside looking in?
So we've pushed very hard on the Royal Free through their CQRM, and there is a focused session next month at the CQRM for the Royal Free. They do have a plan, but we haven't seen it at the moment, so we should be able to update in much more detail around the Royal Free. I've had some discussions with the Director of Nursing in East and North CCG, and they are upping the ante on their scrutiny of East and North Herts Trust. And in fact, this week at West Herts, we raised concerns that East and North Herts Trust have raised about West Herts and the delays in referral, and actually linked the two performance directors together to have those discussions, because we hear the other end of that when we're at West Herts, that they've delayed referrals. So I am aware that that is being pushed very hard with East and North Herts Trust, and we can feed that, the outputs of that into future performance committees.
Any other members of the board who'd like to make any comments? I'm not putting any individuals particularly on the spot, but I'm just wondering in terms of the individual GP board members and their clinical responsibilities, whether there's any, I mean, Rami, you've just mentioned about cancer. Is there anything else that people wanted to draw out of this report?
I know Richard's not here, so opposite
Yeah.
urgent care, we've got that
Yeah.
on the agenda.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that's a key. The strategic deliverables are in here. Do
Okay.
you want to do anything just to mention about anything in the plan care, Asif? And I know Asif's only just taken his portfolio, to be fair. So, and Connect.
Yeah, that was the other thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on that, I was just wondering, I mean, there have been issues obviously between the acute trust, orthopaedics, and the community physiotherapy service and how that's going.
Because if what does come out of that sort of that statement there is that we've all got to get used to, as clinicians, be it in general practice or in hospitals, of actually dealing with a new system, and it is NICE compliant and it is based on evidence, but it is something that our patients have got to be taken through this journey. And I think everybody's finding their feet a little bit in a way which is addressing the demand appropriately. But I think we also know that we have got anecdotes, and we need to learn from those and develop it further. Yeah, Diane.
So just to say that West Herts are now sharing, whether it's sharing with Connect anyway, but they're sharing all incidents with us now where they consider that there's been an issue, particularly with the post-op patients, and we are cited on Connect's response. And I think the recent lot that we've seen and have just come through this morning would say actually in the main they're communication related. I think Connect have recognised for a long time that because of the increased demand, which obviously feeds into our later discussions, that the admin has been a challenge, and sorting those early appointments. So, there are not that many concerns in there that alert me in terms of quality and safety. There are one or two that we need to take forward, but I think if you think about the percentage as part of the number of patients seen.
Okay.
I mean, just following on from that, I think as a clinician, the key areas I see and hear about with regard to the MSK is, one, the communication, which we keep being told that they've got in hand by training up new operators, but it doesn't seem to have improved. And then the other area, I think, where I think there is a little bit of difficulty is the elderly patients who do find it difficult to do the sort of self-help stuff that they put first. And I think we might need to look at that sort of area because I think those are the two areas I hear about clinically.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just follow on from that. So I think the groups that I would like a little bit more of a deep dive with are the sort of the elderly, frail and complex, and also the ones particularly that I think need urgent help. So I appreciate for the vast majority of patients, self-help physio and the approach is a good approach. But I think it feels like patients that might need a bit more urgent help, I wonder how the system is responding. And that may not be Connect itself, but it's the sort of onward transfer into secondary care that often needs to happen quite quickly. And in the old days, a GP might pick up the phone to a consultant and they would squeeze them into clinic. I'm not sure they have the same relationship there. So I've had some examples where patients are going via A&E and sort of a bit finding other routes in, which isn't the intended effect. So I'd like to a bit more of an answer around that and a bit more of a deep dive around that.
There is a problem, especially with the acute rheumatology referrals, when they recognize from the GP referrals.
But it's not just Connect, it's the interface, because now they're interfacing with secondary care, and it's that I'm a little sort of concerned about.
I think with a lot of this, when you put it in for triage, the triage comes back and asks you to actually do it.
So the fit test is now being available for us in only 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, so but the triage will probably go back, because with a lot of these cases now, when you put for triage, not for appointment. Can I just raise the other bit to do with the A&E figures that are going south? We mentioned previously the need to look at the effect of HUC taking on West Essex on the provision in Hertfordshire, because the actual evidence is that the triage lists have increased tremendously over the weekends. Practices have fed back that they are getting the Monday morning effect, whereby any calls from Sunday morning are just triaged through the 111 to go to your GP the following day. Visiting cars are taken off the roads to cover bases, which means that elderly patients end up in ambulances and in A&E, and a lot of the system has actually had a notable change since West Essex has come on board and has been amalgamated with the Hertfordshire cases?
So this is an interim report because we're obviously, because of the date of this board, and so we've only focused on the constitutional targets this time. When we do the 11th of July, that'll be the full one after the Performance Committee, which will be more up to date, and that will include the HUC and everything else. So I think we just need to triangulate that. We are absolutely aware of pressures around resourcing, and since the West Essex system has taken on, and people often tell me about that, and we do follow that through. So I think we should take that and just tie that up with when we go through the Performance Committee next week, and just see if we can see that triangulation or not. But and then we'll obviously East and North Herts CCG lead on that, but we do follow through with those specifics with them. So next time we will receive the full report as well, whereas this time was the constitutional targets. But we'll pick that up, Rami, next week when we have that discussion. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, this will be quite brief because we are reporting month 2, and of course, I would say month 2, there's nothing to report. We haven't got a lot of the data from the providers, the prescribing information isn't through, so we are generally assuming that we will break even. We assume that our plans are still valid. The executive summary on page 193, just briefly wanted to quickly run down that. So we are, as I say, for all the forecasts on everything is break even. You'll see the line on there says cumulative forecast 8.438 million. That is, we kept referring last year when we made a surplus that we were going to get to our 1% of banked surplus, and that is our 1% of banked surplus. So in theory that is available to us, although as I've reported before, actually accessing it is quite tricky, nay, impossible. But it's available, yes, and it also means that we've met our 1%. We're no longer in financial turnaround because we have that money set aside. I'm not going to run through any of the tables because they generally just report that we're breaking even, or our forecast is that we'll break even. Just to bring your attention to page 200, which is the risks. There's not much on there at this stage because, as I just said, we assume that our plans are still valid and robust. The things that we are concerned about are the things you would normally be concerned about, i.e. that we won't deliver QIP. And if we don't deliver QIP, what can we do about that? We do believe that we have reserves to cover that to the tune of 3.6 million. So at the moment we think everything is fine. And obviously we will keep that updated on a monthly basis. And then the underlying position also reasonably interesting. So this is our run rate, if you like. So all things being equal, if we had to pay for everything on an ongoing basis, we actually have an underlying surplus of 4%, which is not a bad place to be. Certainly better than having an underlying deficit. So that just strips out all the non-recurrent ins and outs and looks at the recurrent allocations and the recurrent spend. So I don't intend to say any more than that unless anybody's got any questions.
Just to clarify, Caroline, the £4 million that we lent out or had reallocated last year, are we confident that it says it's coming back in June? Are we confident that that will happen, that we will get that?
Yes. Great. Without interest. No, it's already, we've actioned that through the allocation adjustments already.
Okay. Can I just ask about the large red number on patient transport and why that is a large red number and whether that's going to get bigger? And also what the implications for the services there?
Yeah. Okay. 70. It's a lot. It might be a big number, but it's a lot. It's a lot smaller than last year.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
But it was a problem last year.
No, it was a problem. There's been an ongoing issue with PTS in that we've been relying on private providers to cover for the support that East can't provide. However, Catherine and I have been negotiating with them quite hard over the last few months to sort out the finances on the contract, make it a financially sustainable contract. B, to get East to take on more journeys, and they are now doing all of the Mount Vernon journeys, which is, what service is that? Is that? Cancer. Yeah, it's cancer. Yeah, renal journeys, which is a very large chunk of the private provision that we were paying for, and it's largely what that 76k is, or whatever the number is. I haven't got it in front of me, but there will always be additional journeys we have to pay for, but last year it was hundreds of thousands. This year we're expecting it to be nowhere near that, because we're managing PTS to do the journeys they have been contracted to do.
And most importantly, the patients are getting the journeys that they need.
Yes, and in fact the transfer to Mount Vernon went reasonably smoothly, we believe. There's not been rafts of complaint, and we were quite robust with East about making sure that that was done in a managed way. The delays that happen are generally as discharges stack up in the discharge lounge and they haven't got enough crews on. But we monitor that as well through systems resilience. So our patients are getting the journeys, yes.
Right, thank you.
I understand that prescribing is far too early to tell where we are because of always the delay in reporting. But I remain very concerned about prescribing budgets for the coming year. As a GP, anecdotally on the ground, and I'm sure every GP will agree around the table, we are daily having to prescribe more expensive drugs because of potentially the Brexit effect, or whatever we want to call it. Drugs are unavailable, and it's only the more expensive ones, and also drug companies are increasing their costs of certain medication. Localities are targeted to come within budgets, and I think we ought to just be mindful of that, and mindful of the fact that we need to just monitor where we are with prescribing to make those budgets realistic.
Right,
Only about cost, is it? Sorry, yeah.
So I was just going to respond to that. So we do. I mean, we keep the budgets constantly under review, and I completely get your point. I mean, there's no point setting a budget you can't achieve. We might be a bit slow to update the budgets here, but generally, because the information's so late, but generally issues like the no cheaper stock alternatives get flagged nationally, as it did 2 years ago, and we actually got support for that. So if it becomes a national issue, I mean, if it's a local issue, we'll have to deal with it, but if it's a national issue, often they will pick it up and either advise or support us in a different way.
And we do amend the budgets.
And then we would amend the budgets, yeah. But.
Andy, on shortage of medication, from another CCC, there is an agreement with local pharmacists that they will inform the GPs on shortage of any medicine, and you issue a prescription, and they will then give you the next generic available medicine rather than branded medicine. That was taken up by CCP, and every pharmacy signed up to it. I forwarded that to Sarah Conti, and I was told that it will take many months for us to adopt such a service, although on principle it's a good thing to use. It will save a lot of time, a lot of travel for GPs, and also prescribing what's cost-effective and relevant medicine.
If you'd like to send that to me, Asif, I'll pick that up outside the meeting.
Okay. Any other comments? And this is obviously for UK Fund 2, so very early days. We'll be returning to that. So unless there's any other questions, I'm going to move on. Then just the final conclusion parts. So in terms of reviewing how conflicts of interest were managed in the meeting, well, as we noted, we didn't really have any conflicts noted. So I think Brian, you did mention a past conflict, okay, but helpfully mentioned, so that's helpful. Is there anything else that we need to say on that? I think that's the standard process. And we'll talk about reflection on equality and diversity, given that we've actually devoted some more time today specifically to that, and also flagged up the need to make sure that we can take all these on papers even more highlighted in the future. I'm hoping that would be evidence of our commitment to that. Risks identified, Laura.
The only new one I picked up was adding sexual health.
Okay. So just a little bit, just before we move on to just reminding everybody in the close of the meeting, are there any questions? I'm conscious that theoretically members of the public aren't really here, so if there are some questions, I'm very happy to be asked. No? Thank you. So I just want to say a personal thanks to Laura. So although Laura is going to be with us, I think, on the 11th of July, when I'm actually on holiday for the next board meeting, Laura, for those who don't know, is going on to Masters New. fantastic that it's actually going to be within our ICP system. So I think I'm delighted for that. But I just wanted to say a very special thank you to you, Laura, for all the work and diligence that you've applied across not only this but other committees as well. So really thank you. So date time of next meeting is 2 o'clock in the Stanborough Centre, and I declare the meeting closed, and I think we've got a private meeting starting in an hour's time. Thank you.
Still yes. Yes. I thought you might be off.